You know how they say your whole life can change in a single moment? 6 months ago, I was Luke Harper, a broke single dad in Riverbend, Pennsylvania, fixing beat-up cars for $50, while my 8-year-old daughter Grace wore shoes with holes in them. Then one rainy Tuesday, I pulled a 5-year-old boy named Joey Barnes from a burning car without thinking twice about it. What I didn't know was that his father, Edward Barnes, was a billionaire industrialist who'd been searching the entire country for someone exactly like me, someone with skills he couldn't buy and integrity he couldn't manufacture. 3 weeks later, he offered me $1 billion contract. This is the story of how a mechanic who couldn't afford his daughter's school lunch went from sleeping on an air mattress to signing the biggest automotive safety deal in history, all because I did the right thing without expecting anything in return. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The alarm clock's shrill cry cut through the darkness at 5:30 in the morning, just like it had every day for the past 3 years. Luke Harper's calloused hand slapped the snooze button with practiced precision, his body already moving through the familiar routine of another day in Riverbend. The small apartment felt colder than usual, the October chill seeping through. Windows that hadn't been properly sealed since the Carter administration. Luke's feet hit the worn linoleum floor of his bedroom, the sound muffled by thin socks that had seen better decades. The air mattress beneath him wheezed as his weight shifted, a reminder of the real bed he'd sold 6 months ago when the rent became too much to handle. Through the paper-thin walls, he could hear Mrs. Foster next door, already shuffling around her kitchen, probably starting her morning coffee and wondering how a grown man could live on an air mattress. The bathroom mirror reflected a face that looked older than its 34 years. Dark circles under brown eyes told the story of too many sleepless nights spent worrying about bills, about Grace's future, about whether he was failing as a father. Luke's reflection stared back with the kind of weariness that came from fighting an uphill battle every single day. His work clothes hung on a hook behind the door, the same flannel shirt and jeans he'd worn for 3 days straight, washed in the kitchen sink and dried over the radiator. "Daddy?" Grace's voice drifted from the living room, soft and sleepy. "Morning, sweetheart. Go back to sleep for a little bit." Luke padded through the small apartment, past the kitchen table that doubled as his desk and Grace's homework station, past the couch that served as both living room furniture and his daughter's bed. Grace lay curled under a patchwork quilt that Rose Bennett had made for them last Christmas, her dark hair spread across a pillow that had more duct tape than fabric showing. The sight of his daughter sleeping peacefully was both Luke's greatest joy and his deepest source of anxiety. She deserved so much more than this cramped apartment, more than shoes held together with superglue, more than a father who counted pennies to buy groceries. Grace had never complained, not once, but Luke saw the way she looked at other kids, with their new backpacks and brand-name sneakers. He saw how she'd grown quiet when her class talked about family vacations to places that might as well have been on Mars for all the chance they had of visiting them. Luke's phone buzzed on the kitchen counter, displaying a text from Carl Jackson. "Morning shift starts early today. Mrs. Porter's Buick won't start again." Carl had been Luke's best friend since high school, back when they'd both dreamed of opening their own garage together. Life had taken them in different directions. Carl landed a steady job at Riverbend's biggest auto shop, while Luke had bounced between smaller places, trying to balance work with single parenthood. Carl still talked about their old dreams sometimes, usually after a few beers at Rose's diner, but they both knew it was just talk now. The coffee maker gurgled to life, filling the apartment with the rich aroma that had become Luke's morning salvation. He'd bought the machine second-hand from a yard sale, and it made coffee that could strip paint, but it was caffeine, and it was hot. While it brewed, Luke counted the bills spread across the kitchen table like tarot cards, predicting a difficult future electric bill past due, rent due in 5 days, Grace's school lunch account overdrawn. The numbers swam together in Luke's tired mind, a mathematical puzzle with no solution that didn't involve choosing between keeping the lights on and keeping his daughter fed. "Daddy, is it Tuesday?" Grace had appeared in the kitchen doorway, rubbing her eyes with small fists. She wore pajamas that had once been pink, but had faded to a color that couldn't be found in any crayon box. The knees were thin enough to see through, and the sleeves had been rolled up so many times, they permanently stayed that way. "It is Tuesday, baby girl." "Why?" "Tuesday is pizza day at school." Luke's heart sank. Pizza day meant $3.50 that he didn't have. He'd been hoping Grace would forget, but she never forgot the things that mattered to 8-year-olds. "I'll see what I can do, okay?" Grace nodded solemnly, already understanding more about their situation than any child should have to. She climbed onto the kitchen chair that wobbled because one leg was shorter than the others, accepting the bowl of generic cereal that Luke placed in front of her. The milk was powdered, mixed with water, but Grace ate without complaint. "Mrs. Foster said she'd walk me to school today. She has to go to the doctor anyway. That's nice of her. Did you thank her?" "I made her a card." Grace pulled a folded piece of construction paper from her backpack, decorated with crayon flowers and stick figures. Inside, her careful second-grade handwriting spelled out, "Thank you for being nice to me and Daddy." Luke felt his throat tighten. As he read it, "She's going to love this, Grace." The morning routine continued with practiced efficiency. Grace brushed her teeth with a toothbrush that needed replacing, packed her backpack with homework completed at the kitchen table under the dim light of a lamp from the thrift store. Luke helped her into the jacket that was getting too small, zipping it carefully around the tear near the left pocket that he'd mended with electrical tape. "Have a good day at school, sweetheart. Learn something amazing." "I always do, Daddy." Grace hugged him with the fierce intensity that only children could manage, her small arms wrapping around his waist like she could hold their world together through sheer force of love. Luke kissed the top of her head, breathing in the scent of discount shampoo and childhood innocence. After Grace left with Mrs. Foster, Luke stood in the quiet apartment, surrounded by the evidence of their struggles. The silence felt heavy, broken, only by the distant hum of traffic and the occasional creak of old building settling into another day. He finished his paint-stripping coffee and grabbed his work jacket, checking the pockets for the few tools he owned personally. The walk to Harper's Auto Repair took 15 minutes through Riverbend's downtown area, past storefronts that had seen better decades and sidewalks cracked by too many harsh winters. The town had once thrived when the steel mill was running, but that had closed 10 years ago, taking most of the good jobs with it. Now, Riverbend survived on stubbornness and the kind of small-town pride that refused to admit defeat, even when defeat was staring it in the face. Harper's Auto Repair sat on the corner of Main and Oak, a building that had been many things over the years, a hardware store, a five and dime, even a small restaurant during the mill's heyday. Luke rented the space for $800 a month, which was $600 more than he could consistently afford, but it was the only place in town zoned for automotive work that didn't require a 5-year lease he'd never qualify for. Tia, garage bay door stuck as usual, requiring Luke's full weight to wrestle it open. Inside, 3 vehicles waited for his attention. Mrs. Porter's Buick that Carl had mentioned, a pickup truck with transmission problems that belonged to a farmer from outside town, and a sedan that needed brake work for a single mother who was almost as broke as Luke. Luke's tools were organized with military precision on a workbench that had seen decades of use. Each wrench, each socket, each screwdriver had its designated place, maintained with the kind of care that came from knowing he couldn't afford to replace anything that got lost or broken. The tools represented 15 years of collecting, trading, and carefully saving for the essentials of his trade. The Buick's hood opened with a metallic groan, revealing an engine that had accumulated the kind of problems that came from deferred maintenance and wishful thinking. Luke's trained eye catalogued the issues: corroded battery terminals, a serpentine belt hanging by a thread, oil that looked like chocolate syrup. Mrs. Porter was 83 years old and living on Social Security that barely covered her medications, let alone car repairs. "Morning, Luke." Carl Jackson appeared in the garage doorway, coffee cup in hand, and a grin that suggested he had news worth sharing. Carl stood 6 inches taller than Luke and had the kind of build that came from good genetics rather than hard work, though he'd never been afraid of getting his hands dirty. "You're early. Wanted to catch you before the day got crazy. Pete Walker's looking for someone." Pete Walker owned River Bend's most successful garage, the kind of place that had computerized diagnostic equipment and customers who paid their bills on time. Luke had worked for Pete briefly, 3 years ago, before Grace started having nightmares, and needed her father home at predictable hours. What kind of someone? Full-time mechanic, good pay, benefits, steady hours. He specifically asked about you. Luke's hands stilled on the Buick's engine. Steady pay and benefits sounded like winning. The lottery, but he'd learned that opportunities that seemed too good to be true usually were. "What's the catch?" "No catch. Business is good and he needs someone who knows what they're doing, someone reliable. Reliable enough to show up every day, even when my daughter's sick. Reliable enough to work late when a customer needs their car fixed right now." Carl's smile faded slightly. They both knew the answer to that question. Luke's priorities had been clear since the day Grace's mother walked out, leaving behind only a note and a 2-year-old who didn't understand why Mommy wasn't coming home. He said to think about it. "I'll think about it." But Luke was already thinking about Grace, about the stability that a real job could provide, about the impossibility of being the father she needed while working the hours that steady employment required. The math of single parenthood never balanced, no matter how many times he tried to make it work. Carl lingered in the doorway, watching Luke work with the easy competence that came from years of experience. Luke's hands moved with practiced efficiency, diagnosing problems by sound and feel as much as by sight. It was a skill that couldn't be taught in technical school, the kind of mechanical intuition that separated good mechanics from great ones. "You're wasted here, Luke. You know that, right?" Luke paused, wrench in hand, considering the truth of that statement. Harper's Auto Repair was barely surviving, sustained by Luke's reputation and the loyalty of customers who couldn't afford the bigger shops in town. It wasn't a business, it was a life raft that was slowly taking on water. Maybe, but it's my waste to make. The morning progressed with its familiar rhythm: diagnosis, repair, the satisfaction of bringing dead engines back to life. Luke lost himself in the work, finding peace in the mechanical logic of pistons and gears, in problems that had solutions if you just knew where to look and weren't afraid to get your hands dirty. By noon, the Buick was purring like a contented cat, the pickup's transmission was shifting smoothly, and the sedan's brakes were responding like they were supposed to. 3 problems solved, 3 customers who could go about their lives without worrying about transportation. It wasn't glamorous work, but it mattered in the quiet way that most important things mattered. Luke's phone buzzed with a text from Rose Bennett. "Grace is here, says she's hungry." The school day had ended, which meant Grace was at Rose's diner, doing homework at the corner booth, while Rose pretended she wasn't giving away free food to a little girl whose father counted every penny. Luke wiped his hands on a shop rag that had seen better days and locked up the garage. Rose's diner occupied the ground floor of a brick building that had anchored River Bend's main street since the 1940s. The chrome and vinyl interior hadn't. Been updated since the Reagan administration, but the food was honest and the coffee was strong. Rose had inherited the place from her father and had been feeding River Bend for 23 years with the kind of maternal determination that brooked no argument. Grace sat in their usual booth, homework spread across the table like battle. Plans, a glass of milk and a plate, with half a grilled cheese sandwich at her elbow. She looked up when Luke entered, her face brightening with the kind of smile that made everything else worthwhile. "Daddy, I learned about fractions today." "Show me." Grace launched into an explanation of numerators and denominators with the enthusiasm that 8-year-olds brought to new discoveries. Luke listened with the part of his attention that wasn't calculating how much he owed Rose for Grace's after-school care, for the meals she provided without being asked, for the kindness that kept his daughter fed when his pride wouldn't let him ask for help. The usual. Rose appeared beside their booth, coffee pot in hand, and a smile that suggested the question was purely rhetorical. "Just coffee for me." "Nonsense. You need to eat." Rose disappeared into the kitchen, returning moments later with a plate that held more food than Luke had ordered. It was a dance they performed daily, Rose's generosity disguised as business, Luke's gratitude expressed through his insistence on paying for what he could afford. "Mrs. Porter came by earlier," Rose said, refilling Luke's coffee cup. "Couldn't stop talking about how you fixed her car. Said you charged her half what Pete Walker would have." "Her car needed fixing." "You're too good for your own good, Luke." "Harper." The afternoon stretched into evening, Grace finishing her homework while Luke nursed his coffee and watched the familiar rhythm of small-town life through the diner's windows. River Bend moved at the pace of a place that had learned patience through necessity, where people had time to notice each other's struggles and offer help in the quiet ways that preserved dignity. As they prepared to leave, Grace tugged on Luke's sleeve. "Daddy, can we go to Heritage Park, just for a little while?" Heritage Park sat on the banks of the Susquehanna River, 5 acres of grass and playground equipment that the town had somehow managed to maintain despite budget cuts that had claimed the library's evening hours and the community center's weekend programs. Grace loved the swings, especially the ones that faced the water, where she could pretend she was flying over the river toward adventures that existed only in 8-year-old imaginations. Luke pushed Grace on the swings as the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that reminded him why he'd chosen to stay in River Bend, despite all the reasons to leave. Grace's laughter carried across the park, pure and uncomplicated, a sound that made the struggles of the day fade into background noise. "Hiya, Daddy." Luke pushed harder, watching his daughter soar through the air with the fearless abandon of childhood. For these moments, the unpaid bills and uncertain future seemed less important than Grace's joy, less significant than the simple pleasure of being her father. The park began to empty as families headed home for dinner, leaving Luke and Grace alone with the approaching dusk. They sat on the bench that faced the river, Grace curled against Luke's side with the trusting contentment of a child who believed her father could handle anything the world threw at them. "Daddy, are we poor?" The question came without warning, delivered with the direct honesty that children wielded like surgical instruments. Luke felt his carefully constructed optimism waver under the weight of Grace's innocent curiosity. "Why do you ask?" "Jenny Morrison said her dad said we were poor. She said that's why you can't afford to fix your truck." Luke's truck sat in the garage bay at Harper's Auto Repair, a monument to deferred maintenance and financial priorities. The transmission had been slipping for months, but fixing it would cost money he needed for rent and groceries. It was easier to walk to work than to face the choice between keeping his vehicle running and keeping his daughter fed. We don't have a lot of money, Grace, but we have what matters. What matters? Each other, and friends like Rose and Mrs. Foster, and a home, even if it's small. Grace nodded solemnly, processing this information with the seriousness that childhood brought to adult explanations. Luke wondered if he was failing her by staying in River Bend, by choosing stability over opportunity, by prioritizing her immediate needs over their long-term prospects. "I love you, Daddy. I love you too, baby girl, more than anything." They sat in comfortable silence as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, father and daughter against the world, held together by love and hope and the stubborn belief that tomorrow might be better than today. Luke didn't know that in less than 24 hours, everything would change. He couldn't have imagined that a 5-year-old boy named Joey Barnes was about to enter their lives in the most dramatic way possible, or that Joey's father would soon offer Luke a chance at the kind of life he'd stopped dreaming about years ago. For now, there was just the park, and Grace's warm weight against his side, and the quiet satisfaction of another day survived in River Bend, Pennsylvania. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Wednesday morning arrived with the kind of rain that seemed personally offended by anyone foolish enough to venture outside. Luke woke to the sound of water drumming against the apartment's single window, a rhythm that matched the headache building behind his eyes. Grace was already up, standing at the kitchen counter, trying to reach the cereal box on the top shelf. "Let me get that for you, sweetheart." Luke lifted the box down, noting that it felt lighter than it should have. They were running low on everything: cereal, milk powder, the canned soup that had become their dinner staple. Grace poured her portion carefully, counting the pieces that fell into her bowl with the precision of someone who understood scarcity. Without being told about it, "It's really coming down out there," Grace observed, pressing her nose against the window. "Mrs. Foster might not want to walk in this." Luke checked his phone. No messages from their elderly neighbor, which probably meant she was still planning to make the trip to school despite the weather. At 78, Mrs. Foster had the stubborn independence of someone who'd survived the Great Depression and wasn't about to let a little Pennsylvania rain slow her down. "I'll walk you myself if she can't make it, but then you'll be late for work." Grace's concern for his schedule touched something deep in Luke's chest. 8 years old, and she was already worried about his responsibilities, already carrying burdens that should have been his alone. The phone rang just as Luke was calculating whether he had enough gas money to drive Grace to school. Carl's name flashed on the cracked screen. "Morning, Luke. You need to get down to Highway 15, about 2 miles south of the Heritage Park turnoff." "What's happening?" "Bad accident. Real bad. Multi-car pile-up in this rain." Chief Turner called asking if you could bring your truck and help with recovery. Luke looked out at the downpour, then at Grace finishing her breakfast. His truck might not be reliable for daily driving, but it was still strong enough for emergency towing when the community needed help. "I don't know, Carl. Grace needs to get to school, and my truck's been acting up." Rose said she'd drive Grace. "She's already on her way over." Before Luke could respond, a knock echoed through the apartment. Rose Bennett stood in the hallway, rain dripping from her yellow slicker, car keys in hand. "Morning, honey," she said to Grace, then turned to Luke. Carl called, "You need to go help those folks on the highway." "Rose, I can't ask you to." "You're not asking, I'm telling." "Grace, grab your backpack. We're going to take the scenic route to school." Luke watched his daughter gather her things, with the easy acceptance of a child whose life had been shaped by the kindness of others. Rose Bennett had been making these small interventions for months, appearing whenever Luke's careful balance threatened to tip into chaos. "Thank you," Luke said quietly. "Thank me by getting those people to safety. Weather like this brings out the stupid in drivers." Luke kissed Grace goodbye, promising to pick her up from Rose's after school, then grabbed his jacket and headed into the storm. The rain had transformed River Bend's streets into temporary rivers, carrying leaves and debris towards storm drains that hadn't been upgraded since the Eisenhower administration. Harper's auto repair looked different in the grey morning. Light, smaller somehow, and more vulnerable. Luke's truck started on the third try, the engine coughing like an old man with too many cigarettes in his past. The windshield wipers fought a losing battle against the downpour as Luke navigated through town toward Highway 15. The accident scene appeared through the rain like something from a disaster movie. 4 vehicles scattered across both lanes of the highway, emergency lights painting the wet asphalt in reds and blues. Chief Sam Turner directed traffic around the chaos while paramedics worked on injured passengers. The smell of burned rubber and hot metal cut through the clean scent of rain. "Luke, over here!" Chief Turner waved him toward the worst of the wreckage. A luxury sedan that had spun off the road and struck a concrete barrier. The front end was crumpled like an accordion, steam rising from the engine compartment. In the back seat, Luke. "Could see movement. Driver's unconscious but stable," Turner shouted over the rain. "Problem is, the kid in the back. Door's jammed, and we can't get him out." Luke approached the sedan carefully, noting the way the frame had twisted during impact. Through the rear window, he could see a small boy, maybe 5 years old, conscious, but clearly terrified. The child's eyes were wide with shock, and he was calling for his daddy in a voice that carried over the storm. "Can the fire department get him out?" "Jaws of life are tied up with the other vehicles. This little guy's trapped, but he's not injured as far as we can tell. We need to get that door open." Luke circled the sedan, studying the damage with the analytical eye that 15 years of auto repair had trained. The rear door was bent but not destroyed. The problem was the way the frame had shifted, creating pressure points that traditional tools couldn't address. "I need my torch from the truck and something to brace the roof. Luke, if that car catches fire, it won't. The fuel line's intact, and the battery's disconnected. Give me 15 minutes. Luke worked with the focused intensity that emergency situations demanded. The cutting torch carved through twisted metal with surgical precision, while Chief Turner held a tarp to shield the work area from rain. Inside the car, the little boy had stopped crying, watching Luke work through the rear window with the curious attention that children brought to adult competence. "What's your name, buddy?" Luke called through the glass. "Joey." "Well, Joey, Luke, I'm gonna get you out of there, okay? I need you to stay real still for me. Is my daddy okay?" Luke glanced toward the front seat where paramedics were working on the unconscious driver. The man was breathing, conscious now, but clearly disoriented from the impact. "The doctors are taking good care of your daddy. Right now, I need you to be brave for just a little longer." The cutting work required delicate touches, removing just enough metal to relieve the pressure without compromising the car's structural integrity. Luke had performed similar operations on crashed vehicles before, but never with a child inside. Never with stakes that felt this personal. 15 minutes stretched into 20, then 25. The rain continued its relentless assault while Luke worked, sweat mixing with rainwater on his face despite the October chill. The torch cut through the last section of bent metal with a hiss of superheated water. "Okay, Joey, I'm going to try the door now." The handle turned with a metallic groan. The door opened 6 inches, then stopped, still fighting against the damaged frame. Luke braced his feet against the wet asphalt and pulled with everything he had. The door gave way suddenly, swinging wide to reveal Joey Barnes sitting in his car seat, unharmed but shaking. "There we go, buddy. Let's get you out of there." Luke unbuckled the complex car seat harness with hands that had suddenly developed a tremor. Joey was small for 5, with dark hair and eyes that held too much understanding for his age. He reached for Luke with the desperate trust that children reserved for adults who appeared during their worst moments. "I want my daddy." "I know you do. The paramedics are going to check you out first. Make sure you're okay, then you can see your daddy." Luke lifted Joey from the car seat, surprised by how light the boy felt, how fragile. The child's arms wrapped around Luke's neck with fierce intensity as they moved away from the wreckage toward the waiting ambulance. "Sir, we need to examine the child." The paramedic, a young woman with kind eyes and steady hands, reached for Joey. The boy's grip on Luke tightened. "It's okay, Joey. This is Rachel. She's going to make sure you're not hurt anywhere." Luke had read the paramedic's name tag, understanding that small details mattered to frightened children. Joey allowed himself to be transferred to the ambulance, but his eyes never left Luke's face. The examination revealed what Luke had hoped: a scared little boy with no serious injuries, protected by excellent safety restraints and the kind of luck that didn't visit accident scenes often enough. Joey's father was conscious now, calling weakly for his son from the stretcher where paramedics were treating a concussion and possible internal injuries. "Daddy!" Joey's reunion with his father played out in the cramped space of the ambulance. Father and son reaching for each other with the desperate relief of people who'd come too close to losing everything that mattered. Luke stepped back, giving them privacy for a moment that belonged to them alone. Sir, Joey's father was trying to sit up despite the paramedics' protests, his eyes searching the crowd until they found Luke. "You saved my son." "Just did what?" "Needed doing." "What's your name?" "Luke Harper. Edward Barnes, and I owe you everything." The ambulance doors closed on Edward Barnes and his son, taking them toward River Bend General Hospital and leaving Luke standing in the rain beside the wreckage of what had been someone's normal Tuesday morning. Chief Turner appeared at his elbow, rain dripping from his uniform cap. "Hell of a thing, Luke. That little boy would have been trapped for hours if you hadn't been here." Luke nodded, suddenly aware of how tired he felt, how the adrenaline of the rescue was fading into the ordinary ache of a man who'd been awake since 5:30 and still had a full day's work ahead of him. "Need help with the rest of this?" "Fire department's got it now. You should get out of this rain before you catch pneumonia." Luke drove back through River Bend with the radio playing classic rock at low volume, the familiar songs providing soundtrack to the strange unreality of the morning's events. Main Street looked different somehow, as if the rescue had shifted his perspective on the town's quiet rhythms and predictable challenges. Harper's Auto Repair felt like sanctuary after the chaos of the accident scene. Luke changed into dry clothes from the small closet he kept in the back office, then stood before the space heater that barely took the chill off the October air. His hands were still shaking slightly, not from cold, but from the lingering adrenaline of holding someone else's child, of being responsible for a life that wasn't his own. The Buick still sat in the first bay, Mrs. Porter's transportation lifeline, waiting for Luke's attention. He'd promised it would be ready by noon, and Mrs. Porter was probably checking her kitchen clock every few minutes, wondering if her car would be running in time for her weekly grocery trip. Luke lost himself in the familiar rhythm of mechanical work, finding peace in problems that had clear solutions and predictable outcomes. The Buick's engine responded to his ministrations like a grateful patient, each adjustment bringing it closer to reliable operation. His phone buzzed with a text from Rose. "Grace is fine. Heard about the accident on the radio. You okay?" Luke. I typed back, "All good. Picking Grace up after school as planned," but he wasn't entirely all right. Something about the morning's events had unsettled him in ways he couldn't articulate. Maybe it was the reminder of how quickly normal life could transform into crisis, or the weight of Joey Barnes's trust, or the look in Edward Barnes's eyes when he'd said he owed Luke everything. The afternoon passed slowly, each repair task a meditation on the difference between problems that could be fixed and problems that were just part of life. Mrs. Porter picked up her Buick with effusive thanks, and a plate of homemade cookies that would constitute Luke's lunch. The farmer's pickup ran smoothly after its transmission work, earning Luke $50 that would help keep the electricity on for another week. By 4 o'clock, the garage was empty, except for Luke and the persistent sound of rain on the metal roof. He cleaned his tools with the methodical care that had become second nature, preparing for tomorrow's challenges while his mind wandered back to the scared little boy in the back seat of a wrecked sedan. Luke had no way of knowing that at Riverbend General Hospital, Edward Barnes was making phone calls that would change everything. He couldn't have imagined that Joey Barnes was asking the nurses about the man who saved me, or that Edward Barnes was having his assistant compile a complete background report on one Luke Harper of Riverbend, Pennsylvania. The rain finally stopped as Luke locked up the garage, leaving behind the clean smell of washed air and the promise of clearer skies tomorrow. He walked through Riverbend's quiet streets toward Rose's diner, where Grace would be waiting with homework completed and stories about her day. The diner's warm light spilled onto the wet sidewalk like a welcome mat, inviting him into the kind of community that still existed in small towns, where people knew each other's troubles and helped without being asked. Luke had no idea that his life was about to become something entirely different, that the man whose son he'd saved was already planning to offer him opportunities beyond his wildest imagination. For now, there was just the simple pleasure of pushing through the diner's door to find Grace looking up from her homework with a smile that made everything else worthwhile. "Daddy, Mrs. Rose said you were a hero today." Luke slid into the booth beside his daughter, accepting the cup of coffee that Rose placed in front of him without being asked. Outside, Riverbend settled into evening routines that had remained unchanged for decades, unaware that change was coming, whether they were ready for it or not. Thursday morning brought clarity to Riverbend's streets, the storm's aftermath evident in scattered leaves and puddles that reflected a sky scrubbed clean by yesterday's rain. Luke arrived at Harper's Auto Repair to find Detective Roy Gibson waiting beside his patrol car, coffee cup steaming in the crisp air. "Morning, Luke. Got a few minutes?" Detective Gibson had been Riverbend's primary investigator since Luke was in high school, a methodical man who approached every case with the patience of someone who understood that truth usually revealed itself slowly. His presence at the garage suggested that yesterday's accident had complications beyond twisted metal and insurance claims. "What can I do for you, Roy?" "Need to talk about the Barnes accident. Your statement, some follow-up questions." Luke unlocked the garage and gestured Gibson inside, away from the morning foot traffic that moved along Main Street with the predictable rhythm of small-town commerce. The detective pulled out a notebook that had seen better decades, pages filled with handwriting that only he could decipher. "Walk me through the rescue again, from the beginning." Luke recounted the previous day's events with mechanical precision, describing the damage assessment, the cutting technique, the careful extraction of Joey Barnes from the crumpled sedan. Gibson listened without interruption, occasionally making notes in his cryptic shorthand. "You mentioned the car seat, high-end model. Best I've ever seen. 5-point harness, reinforced side panels, probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. And the car itself." Luke considered the question, remembering details that his trained eye had catalogued automatically. The sedan had been expensive, European, the kind of vehicle that suggested its owner had resources beyond Riverbend's usual economic demographic. Custom work, reinforced frame, upgraded safety systems. Someone put serious money into making that car as safe as possible. Gibson nodded, making another note. "Edward Barnes has been asking about you. Wants your contact information, background, that sort of thing. He said he owed me. People say things like that after accidents." "Maybe, but he's had his people calling the station, the fire department, even talked to Judge Williams about your character. That's not usual grateful parent behavior." Luke felt something shift in his chest, a flutter of unease mixed with curiosity. In Riverbend, background checks were what happened when someone applied for bank loans they wouldn't qualify for or jobs they wouldn't get. The idea that a stranger was investigating his life felt invasive and intriguing in equal measure. What kind of questions? Employment history, financial situation, family status, legal troubles which you don't have, community involvement, which you do. He's being thorough. Why? Gibson closed his notebook with a snap that seemed to punctuate the conversation's serious turn. That's what I'm hoping you can tell me. Men like Edward Barnes don't usually take this kind of interest in Good Samaritans unless there's more to the story. Men like Edward Barnes? You don't know who he is, do you? Luke shook his head, suddenly aware that his ignorance might be significant. Gibson pulled out his phone, showing Luke a news article with Edward Barnes's photograph. The man looked exactly as Luke remembered, mid-40s, graying hair, expensive suit even in the hospital. But the headline changed everything. Barnes Industries. Automotive manufacturing, defense contracts, safety systems. Forbes estimated his net worth at $8 billion last year. Luke stared at the phone screen, processing information that felt fictional. $8 billion. The number was so large it lost meaning, like trying to visualize the distance between stars. Joey Barnes wasn't just a scared little boy. He was the son of one of the wealthiest men in Pennsylvania. He saved my life once too, you know. Gibson's comment seemed to come from nowhere, pulling Luke back from his contemplation of impossible wealth. How's that? 15 years ago, before you moved back to Riverbend, my partner and I responded to a domestic violence call that went bad. Shooter had us pinned down in a house on Maple Street. Barnes happened to be driving through town, saw the situation, called in federal backup from some connection he had. Could have kept driving, but he didn't. He lived here, grew up here, left for college and never came back except to visit his grandmother until she passed. Most people forgot about the Barnes
family after that.
Luke absorbed this information slowly, understanding that yesterday's rescue had connected him to Riverbend's hidden history, to storylines that ran deeper than the town's visible surface. Edward Barnes wasn't just a wealthy stranger. He was a local boy who'd made good and remembered where he came from. So what happens now? Now you wait. Men like Barnes don't usually make moves quickly, but when they do, those moves tend to be significant. Gibson left Luke alone with his thoughts, and the growing certainty that his carefully constructed life was about to become something entirely different. The garage felt smaller somehow, as if the walls had moved closer while he wasn't paying attention. Mrs. Porter's replacement alternator occupied Luke's morning. A straightforward job that allowed his mind to wander while his hands worked with practiced efficiency. The alternator belonged to a car that had seen better decades, but Mrs. Porter couldn't afford better decades. She needed reliable transportation to her doctor's appointments and weekly grocery runs, and Luke's job was to provide that reliability for whatever she could afford to pay. Knock, knock. Carl Jackson appeared in the garage doorway, but his usual easy grin was replaced by an expression Luke couldn't quite read. Carl held a newspaper folded to show the front page, headline visible. Even from across the garage, you made the paper. Luke wiped his hands on a shop rag and accepted the Riverbend Gazette, a weekly publication that usually covered school board meetings and church potluck dinners. The headline read, "Local Mechanic Saves Child in Highway Rescue," with a photograph that someone had taken at the accident scene, showing Luke carrying Joey Barnes toward the ambulance. Where did they get this picture? Someone with a cell phone, probably. Story says Edward Barnes issued a statement praising your exceptional courage and skill under dangerous conditions. Pretty fancy language for a thank you note. Luke scanned the article, recognizing the basic facts of the rescue, but feeling disconnected from the heroic narrative that the reporter had constructed. The story made him sound like someone he didn't recognize, a larger-than-life figure rather, than a broke mechanic who'd simply done what needed doing. Says here that Barnes Industries is exploring opportunities to recognize outstanding individuals who embody the company's core values. That sound like normal grateful parent talk to you? Nothing about this feels normal. Carl settled onto the stool that Luke kept for customers who wanted to watch their cars being repaired, studying his friend with the attention of someone who'd known him long enough to read between conversational lines. "You scared?" Luke considered the question seriously. Scared wasn't quite right, but something close to it. The feeling of standing at the edge of a cliff, knowing that the next step would either lead to flight or falling. Nervous, maybe. My life works the way it is. Grace is happy, we're getting by. I know what tomorrow looks like. Getting by isn't the same as living. It is when you're responsible for someone else's happiness. Carl nodded, understanding the weight that single parenthood placed on every decision, every opportunity, every risk. They'd had versions of this conversation before, usually late at night at Rose's diner when the coffee was too strong, and the future felt too uncertain. What if this Barnes thing is real? What if he's offering something that could change Grace's life? What if it's not? What if I get her hopes up and then it falls apart? The questions hung in the air between them, unanswerable. Without more information, without understanding what Edward Barnes actually wanted and what he was prepared to offer, Luke returned to Mrs. Porter's alternator, finding comfort in the mechanical precision that governed automotive repair. The phone rang just after noon, displaying a number Luke didn't recognize with the Philadelphia area code. He almost let it go to voicemail, but something made him answer on the fourth ring. Harper's Auto Repair. "Mr. Harper, this is Helen Martinez, calling on behalf of Mr. Edward Barnes. He'd like to meet with you if you're available." Luke's hand tightened on the phone, sudden understanding that the conversation he'd been expecting was finally beginning. Helen Martinez had the kind of professional voice that suggested expensive education and significant responsibility. What kind of meeting? Mr. Barnes would prefer to discuss that in person. Would this afternoon be convenient? He can come to River Bend. He wants to come here. If that works for you, Mr. Barnes is very interested in speaking with you about a potential opportunity. Luke looked around the garage, seeing it suddenly through the eyes of a billionaire visitor. The concrete floor stained with decades of oil changes, the workbench that had been improvised from scrap lumber, the space heater that fought a losing battle against October's chill. It wasn't much, but it was his. 2 o'clock would work. Excellent. Mr. Barnes will be there at 2. Thank you, Mr. Harper. The line went dead, leaving Luke staring at his phone and wondering what he'd just agreed to. A billionaire was coming to Harper's Auto Repair to River Bend to discuss an opportunity that Luke couldn't begin to imagine. Carl had been listening from his perch on the customer stool, reading Luke's expression with the accuracy of long-time friendship. That was him. His assistant. He's coming here at 2. Here, to the garage? Luke nodded, suddenly aware of how much cleaning needed to happen in the next 2 hours, how many ways a person could prepare for a conversation that had no precedent. In his experience, I should call Rose, ask her to keep Grace a little longer. Good idea. And Luke? Yeah? Whatever he's offering, remember that you're worth it. You saved his son's life. That means something. Luke spent the next hour cleaning Harper's Auto Repair with the focused intensity usually reserved for preparing for health department inspections. He swept the floor, organized his tools, even attempted to make the small office area look professional rather than desperate. The effort felt futile, like trying to make a studio apartment suitable for hosting a state dinner. At 1:45, a black sedan with tinted windows pulled up outside the garage. Luke recognized Edward Barnes immediately as he stepped out of the passenger side, looking exactly as he had in the hospital photograph, but somehow more substantial in person. A second man emerged from the driver's side, older, watchful, clearly security rather than chauffeur. Mr. Harper. Edward Barnes extended his hand with the kind of confident smile that suggested he was comfortable in any situation, whether hospital emergency rooms or small-town auto repair shops. His handshake was firm without being aggressive, the grip of someone who understood that first impressions carried weight. Mr. Barnes, how's Joey doing? Much better, thanks to you. He's been asking about the man who saved me every day since the accident. Barnes surveyed the garage with the quick assessment of someone accustomed to evaluating facilities and equipment. His expression revealed nothing, neither approval nor disappointment, just the neutral attention of a person gathering information. This is quite an operation you have here. It's not much, but it serves the community. Sometimes the most important work happens in places that don't look important. May I? Barnes gestured toward the interior of the garage, asking permission to enter Luke's professional space. The courtesy felt significant, an acknowledgement that Luke had standing in this conversation despite the obvious disparity in their circumstances. Luke led Barnes through the garage, explaining the repair work in progress, the equipment he used, the challenges of maintaining older vehicles for customers who couldn't afford newer ones. Barnes listened with the kind of attention that suggested genuine interest rather than polite obligation. You did all this work on Mrs. Porter's alternator yourself. Rebuilt rather than replaced. She can't afford a new one, but a rebuilt alternator will give her another few years. How much did you charge her? Luke hesitated, knowing that his pricing would seem impossibly low to someone accustomed to luxury automotive service. $50 parts and labor. And how much should you have charged? What the market will bear. Mrs. Porter's on Social Security. $50 is what she can afford. Barnes nodded slowly, as if Luke's answer had confirmed something he'd been hoping to hear. They moved to the small office area, where Barnes settled into the folding chair that Luke kept for customer consultations. Mr. Harper, I want to talk to you about an opportunity, something that could change your life and Grace's life in ways you probably can't imagine. Luke felt his heart rate increase, understanding that the next few minutes would determine whether his carefully constructed world remained intact or transformed into something entirely different. I'm listening. Edward Barnes leaned forward in the folding chair, his expensive suit contrasting sharply with the garage's utilitarian surroundings. Luke remained standing, unconsciously positioning himself behind his workbench as if the familiar tools could provide some protection against whatever was coming. Before I explain why I'm here, I need you to understand something about my company. Barnes Industries didn't become successful by accident. We identify exceptional talent wherever it exists, regardless of credentials or circumstances. I'm not sure what you mean. 3 days ago, I watched you extract my son from a situation that had stumped trained emergency responders. You assessed the problem, identified the solution, and executed a rescue that required both technical skill and split-second decision-making under extreme pressure. Barnes pulled out his phone, showing Luke a video that had been recorded at the accident scene. Luke watched himself working with the cutting torch, noting details he'd forgotten in the adrenaline of the moment. His movements were precise, economical, the work of someone who understood metal and stress and the physics of automotive construction. This footage has been reviewed by our head of engineering, our safety director, and 3 outside consultants. They all reached the same conclusion. You demonstrated advanced problem-solving abilities that we rarely see in candidates with advanced degrees. Luke felt heat rising in his cheeks, uncomfortable with the clinical analysis of what had felt like simple necessity. I just did what needed doing. Exactly. Without hesitation, without overthinking, without concern for your own safety. Those are qualities that can't be taught, Mr. Harper. They're either part of someone's character or they're not. Barnes stood and walked to the workbench where Luke had been rebuilding Mrs. Porter's alternator. He examined the work with the attention, of someone who understood mechanical systems, running his fingers along connections that Luke had rewired with patient precision. Tell me about this repair. Standard alternator rebuild. The original failed, but the housing and main components were salvageable. Cheaper than replacement, more reliable than a junkyard part. How did you learn to do this level of work? Luke considered the question, realizing that his automotive education had been assembled from dozens of sources over many years. High school shop class, community college courses, mostly learning on the job. You pick things up when you have. 2. No formal engineering background? 2 years toward a mechanical engineering degree at Penn State. Had to drop out when Grace was born. Barnes nodded as if this information fit a pattern he'd been expecting. What was your GPA? 3.8, but that was a long time ago. Academic performance like that doesn't just disappear, Mr. Harper. It suggests capabilities that haven't been fully utilized. Luke shifted uncomfortably, uncertain where the conversation was heading, but increasingly aware that it involved evaluations of his life that felt both invasive and strangely validating. Mr. Barnes, I appreciate your interest, but I'm not sure what you're looking for. I'm looking for someone to head a new division at Barnes Industries, someone who can bridge the gap between theoretical engineering and practical application. Someone who understands that the best safety systems in the world are worthless if they can't be maintained by ordinary mechanics in ordinary garages. The words hung in the air between them, their implications too large for Luke to process immediately. Head of a division at Barnes Industries. The possibility seemed as remote as being offered a position with NASA. I think you've got the wrong person. I don't think I do. Let me tell you about the Automotive Safety Innovation Division. It's a new program focused on developing safety systems that can be retrofitted to existing vehicles. Not just luxury cars, but the 10-year-old sedans and 15-year-old pickups that most Americans actually drive. Barnes pulled out a tablet, showing Luke technical drawings that looked like something from an automotive engineering textbook. The designs were elegant, sophisticated, but presented in a way that made their practical applications clear. Current safety technology is designed for new vehicle integration. We want to create systems that can be installed in any qualified garage, maintained with standard tools, repaired by mechanics who learned their trade the same way you did. Luke studied the tablet screen, recognizing the engineering challenges that such systems would present. Retrofitting safety equipment required understanding not just how new technology worked, but how it would interact with older automotive designs that hadn't been built to accommodate modern innovations. This would be incredibly complex. Exactly. Which is why we need someone who understands both the theoretical principles and the practical realities. Someone who spent years making old systems work with limited resources. You're talking about millions of dollars in research and development. Billions, actually. This division will have an initial budget of $2 billion over 5 years. We're not talking about minor improvements, Mr. Harper. We're talking about revolutionizing automotive safety for vehicles that are already on the road. Luke set the tablet down carefully, as if it might explode if handled roughly. $2 billion. The number was so large it felt fictional, like something from a movie about corporate espionage or international conspiracies. Why me? You could hire MIT graduates, people with decades of experience in automotive engineering. We have those people. They're excellent at what they do, but they think in terms of ideal conditions and unlimited budgets. They design systems for vehicles that cost $60,000 and assume customers will visit authorized dealers for all maintenance. Barnes gestured around the garage, encompassing the improvised workbench and hand-selected tools that represented Luke's professional arsenal. You think in terms of real-world constraints. You solve problems with whatever resources are available. You understand that the mechanic in rural Montana needs to be able to diagnose and repair whatever we design using tools he already owns. That's a nice theory, but running a corporate division requires skills I don't have. Management, budgets, personnel decisions. I've never supervised anyone except myself. Those skills can be learned. What can't be learned is the intuitive understanding of how mechanical systems actually behave under stress. What can't be taught is the ability to see solutions that others miss because they're too focused on conventional approaches. Barnes returned to his chair, leaning back with the relaxed posture of someone who was confident in his position, but willing to be patient while others caught up. I've been researching your background for 3 days, Mr. Harper. Not just your technical abilities, but your character. Do you know what I found? Luke shook his head, uncertain whether he wanted to hear the answer. Mrs. Agnes Porter told my investigator that you've never charged her full price for repairs, that you sometimes work on her car for free when she can't afford to pay. Father Santos at St. Mary's said you donated labor to repair the church van when they couldn't find funding for professional service. Rose Bennett mentioned that you've never missed picking up Grace from her diner, never been late, never failed to pay your tab, even when money was tight. Those aren't extraordinary things. They are to me. They represent reliability, integrity, and commitment to community. Those are the qualities I want leading this division. Luke felt overwhelmed by the weight of Barnes's attention, by the implications of a conversation that had moved far beyond polite gratitude for yesterday's rescue. The offer being presented felt too large to comprehend, too significant to trust. What exactly are you proposing? Barnes smiled for the first time since entering the garage, the expression transforming his serious face into something more approachable. I'm proposing that you accept the position of Director of Automotive Safety Innovation, with full authority over research, development, and implementation of retrofittable safety systems. Initial salary of $400,000 per year, with performance bonuses that could double that amount. Luke's knees felt weak suddenly, and he gripped the edge of the workbench for support. $400,000 per year. The amount was more than he'd earned in the previous 5 years combined. That's impossible. It's exactly what the position is worth to Barnes Industries, but salary is just the beginning. We're also prepared to offer a signing bonus of $2 million, payable immediately upon acceptance. Luke stared at Barnes, searching for signs that this was an elaborate joke or some kind of psychological experiment. $2 million. The number was so far beyond his experience that it felt like hearing someone describe the surface temperature of the sun. Mr. Barnes, I think you're confusing me with someone else. I'm not confused, Mr. Harper. I'm offering you the opportunity to use your abilities on a scale that matches their potential, to develop safety systems that could save thousands of lives every year, to transform an industry that's been thinking too small for too long. And if I fail? Then you fail with the full resources of Barnes Industries behind you, with the best engineers in the country as your team, with technologies and testing facilities that most researchers can only dream about. Barnes stood and walked to the garage's single window, looking out at Main Street where Riverbend continued its quiet afternoon routine, unaware that one of its residents was being offered a chance to step into an entirely different kind of life. I won't lie to you, Mr. Harper. This position will require you to relocate. The main research facility is outside Philadelphia, about 2 hours from here. Barnes Industries will handle all moving expenses, will assist with finding appropriate housing, will ensure that Grace has access to excellent schools. Luke felt the conversation shifting into practical considerations, details that made the impossible offer feel more real and more terrifying. I'd have to leave Riverbend. You'd have to leave this version of your life, but you'd be creating a new version, one where Grace never has to worry about whether there's money for school lunches or new shoes. She's happy here. Her friends are here, her school, everything familiar. Children are more adaptable than adults. Mr. Harper, what they need most is security and opportunity. This position would provide both. Luke walked to the same window where Barnes stood, looking out at the town that had been his entire world for the past 8 years. Riverbend represented safety, predictability, the kind of small-town community where people looked after each other's children and nobody asked questions when someone needed help. How long do I have to decide? Take whatever time you need. This offer doesn't have an expiration date. Barnes pulled a business card from his jacket pocket, the paper thick and expensive, the printing understated but elegant. My direct number is on the back. When you're ready to discuss details, or if you have questions, call me. Luke accepted the card, noting that it felt heavier than ordinary business cards, as if even the stationery reflected the weight of the opportunity being presented. Mr. Harper, I want you to understand something. This offer isn't charity. It's not gratitude for saving Joey's life, though I'll never forget what you did for my family. This is a business decision based on your demonstrated abilities and character. It feels like charity. I know it does, but consider this. 3 days ago, you solved a problem that had stumped emergency responders with years of training and specialized equipment. You did it using nothing but your understanding of metal stress and structural engineering, applied under conditions that would have paralyzed most people. Barnes moved toward the garage door, preparing to leave but clearly wanting to conclude. The conversation on the right note. That kind of problem-solving ability applied to automotive safety research with unlimited resources and the best team we can assemble could revolutionize how we protect people in vehicles. That's not charity, Mr. Harper. That's recognizing talent where it exists and giving it the platform it deserves. Luke followed Barnes outside, where the black sedan waited with its patient driver. The October afternoon had grown cooler, with clouds building toward evening that suggested more rain might be coming. One more thing, Barnes said, pausing with his hand on the car door. Joey has been asking if he can visit the man who saved him. If you're comfortable with it, I'd like to bring him by sometime. Not to pressure you about the job offer, just to let him say thank you properly. I'd like that. Good. I'll be in touch. The sedan pulled away from Harper's Auto Repair, leaving Luke standing on the sidewalk with a business card that felt like it weighed 10 pounds and a head full of possibilities that seemed too extraordinary to believe. $400,000 per year, $2 million signing bonus, director of a division with a $2 billion budget. Luke looked back at his garage, seeing it with new eyes. The oil-stained concrete, the improvised workbench, the space heater that barely functioned, it all looked smaller now, more provisional, like a temporary stage set rather than a permanent home. His phone buzzed with a text from Rose. Grace, finished homework. Ready when you are. Luke locked the garage and began walking toward Rose's diner, his mind churning with calculations and possibilities and fears. In his pocket, Edward Barnes's business card felt like a passport to a country he'd never imagined visiting. The walk to Rose's diner felt longer than usual, each step carrying Luke further from the conversation that had just upended everything. He thought he knew about his future. Edward Barnes's business card remained in his pocket, but its presence felt as significant as carrying a live grenade. $400,000. The number kept echoing in his mind, refusing to settle into anything resembling reality. Rose's diner hummed with its usual afternoon energy, coffee cups clinking against saucers, and conversations flowing with the comfortable rhythm of people who'd known each other for decades. Grace looked up from her corner booth when Luke entered, her face brightening with the uncomplicated joy that still had the power to center his world no matter how chaotic everything else became. Daddy, I got 100% on my spelling test. Luke slid into the booth across from his daughter, accepting the coffee that Rose placed in front of him without being asked. The normalcy of the moment felt surreal after his conversation. with Barnes, as if he'd stepped from one universe into another where spelling tests mattered more than billion-dollar job offers. "That's fantastic, sweetheart. Which words were on the test?" Grace launched into a detailed recitation of her spelling triumph, complete with dramatic reenactments of the more challenging words. Luke listened with the part of his attention that wasn't calculating what $400,000 per year would mean for Grace's education, her future, the opportunities that money could provide. "You seem distracted," Rose observed, refilling his coffee cup with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd been reading customers' moods for decades. "Long day. Man in the expensive suit have anything to do with that?" Luke glanced around the diner, noting that several other patrons were watching their booth with the interested attention that small towns brought to unusual events. Edward Barnes's visit to Harper's Auto Repair had probably been noticed by half of Riverbend's population. Just business. Rose's expression suggested she wasn't buying the casual explanation, but she'd lived in small towns long enough to know when to press for information and when to wait for it to be offered voluntarily. "Grace, honey, why don't you go help Betty? In the kitchen? She's making apple pie for tonight's special." Grace departed for the kitchen with the enthusiasm of an 8-year-old who'd been offered a chance to participate in adult activities. Rose settled into the booth beside Luke, her voice dropping to the confidential tone reserved for serious conversations. "Carl stopped by earlier, said you looked like someone had hit you with a truck after that Barnes fellow left. It's complicated. Most important things are. You want to talk about it?" Luke considered his options, weighing the relief of sharing his burden against the impossibility of explaining something he didn't fully understand himself. Rose Bennett had been his unofficial advisor since he'd returned to River Bend, offering wisdom with the same generosity she showed toward everything else. "He offered me a job." "What kind of job?" Luke pulled out Barnes's business card, sliding it across the table like evidence in a trial. Rose examined it with the careful attention of someone who understood that expensive stationery usually accompanied expensive problems. "Barnes Industries, that's the company that makes safety equipment for military vehicles, among other things." "What kind of position?" Luke took a deep breath, preparing to speak words that still felt fictional. "Director of Automotive Safety. Innovation, $400,000 salary, $2 million signing bonus." Rose's coffee cup stopped halfway to her lips, suspended in the kind of freeze that accompanied information too significant to process immediately. She set the cup down carefully as if sudden movements might shatter the moment. "Luke Harper, please tell me you're not joking." "I wish I was. $400,000 per year. Plus bonuses, plus benefits, plus relocation assistance because the job's in Philadelphia." Rose leaned back against the booth's vinyl upholstery, her expression cycling through surprise, excitement, and something that looked like mourning. "You'd have to leave Riverbend. That's the part I can't figure out. Grace has her whole life here. Her school, her friends, Mrs. Foster next door who watches her after school, everything familiar. Grace also has holes in her shoes and wears clothes from the church donation box." The observation stung because it was accurate. Luke had been so focused on providing emotional stability that he'd sometimes lost sight of the material limitations that defined Grace's daily experience. Money isn't everything. No, but it's something. And when you don't have enough of it, that something becomes pretty important. Rose signaled Betty for a fresh pot of coffee, clearly settling in for the kind of conversation that required caffeine and patience in equal measure. "Tell me about the job itself. What would you actually be doing?" Luke explained Barnes's vision for retrofittable safety systems, the challenge of creating technology that could be installed and maintained in ordinary garages. Rose listened with the focused attention of someone who understood that the details mattered as much as the money. "Sounds like work that could save lives." "That's what Barnes said." "You don't believe him?" I believe him. That's what makes this so difficult. If it was just about money, I could turn it down. But the idea of developing safety systems that could protect families like the Barnes family, like us, that's harder to dismiss. Grace's laughter echoed from the kitchen, accompanied by Betty's voice explaining the proper technique for rolling pie crust. The sound represented everything Luke valued about their life in Riverbend: community, security, the kind of relationships that developed over years of shared experience. What does Grace think? She doesn't know yet. I wanted to figure out my own feelings before I complicated hers. You might be underestimating her. 8-year-olds are pretty good at handling change when the adults in their lives are honest about what's happening. Luke's phone vibrated with a text message from an unknown number. Mr. Harper, this is Helen Martinez from Mr. Barnes's office. Joey would like to visit Saturday afternoon if convenient. Please let me know. Thank you. That's Barnes's assistant. His son wants to visit this weekend. Rose read the message over Luke's shoulder, her expression softening. The little boy you saved? Joey, 5 years old. You should say yes. Grace would love meeting him, and you need to see this family as people rather than just an opportunity. Luke typed back his agreement to Saturday's visit, then returned the phone to his pocket where it seemed to vibrate with possibilities that extended far beyond text messages. Rose, can I ask you something? Anything. If you were in my position, what would you do? Rose considered the question with the seriousness it deserved, her fingers tracing patterns on the table's surface while she assembled her thoughts. 20 years ago, I had an offer to sell this diner to a restaurant chain. Good money, enough to retire comfortable and maybe travel like I'd always planned. I turned it down because Riverbend needed this place, needed somewhere for people to gather and feel like they belonged to something. Do you regret that decision? Some days, especially when the roof leaks and the freezer breaks down and I'm working 16-hour days to keep this place running. But most days, no. I chose community over opportunity, and that choice has given my life meaning. But your situation was different. You were choosing for yourself, not for someone else's future. True. Grace's needs changed the calculation completely. Rose paused as Grace emerged from the kitchen, flour dusting her clothes, and a smile that suggested pie making had been a complete success. She climbed back into the booth beside Luke, radiating the satisfied energy of a child who'd been useful and appreciated. Betty said, I can help make pie anytime I want. She's going to teach me about different kinds of apples and how they affect the flavor. Luke felt his heart constrict with the awareness that moments like this might become casualties of the decision he was facing. In Philadelphia, Grace wouldn't have Betty's informal cooking lessons, or Mrs. Foster's after-school care, or the dozens of small kindnesses that made up their support network. That's wonderful, sweetheart. Grace studied his face with the perceptive attention that children brought to adult emotions they couldn't quite understand. Daddy, you look sad. Just thinking about grown-up things, the man who came to see you today. Luke exchanged glances with Rose, recognizing that Grace had been more aware of the afternoon's events than he'd realized. 8-year-olds missed very little, especially when those events involved their parents and unfamiliar visitors. How did you know about that? Mrs. Foster saw the fancy car. She said it looked like the kind of car that important people drive. He is important, and he offered Daddy a new job. Grace's eyes widened with interest rather than alarm, her expression suggesting that new jobs were interesting developments, rather than threatening disruptions. What kind of job? Working with cars, but different cars, helping make them safer for families. Would it pay more money? The directness of the question surprised Luke, though it probably shouldn't have. Grace understood their financial situation better than he'd wanted to admit, had probably been aware of the calculations and compromises that shaped their daily lives. Yes, much more money. Enough money for new shoes. Luke felt tears threatening, recognizing that his daughter's dreams were both heartbreakingly modest and completely reasonable. New shoes, the kind of basic necessity that other children took for granted. Enough money for lots of new shoes, and a bigger apartment, and maybe even a house. Grace nodded solemnly, processing this information with the careful attention she brought to important announcements. Would we have to move away from River Bend? Probably. Away from Rose and Mrs. Foster and Betty? Yes. Grace considered this trade-off with the practical wisdom that poverty had taught her early. New shoes and houses against familiar faces and established relationships. Luke watched her mental calculations, understanding that whatever decision he made would affect her in ways he couldn't fully predict. Can we think about it together? Of course we can. Rose had been watching this exchange with the emotional investment of someone who cared about both participants, her expression cycling between hope for their future and sadness about the possibility of their departure. Grace, honey, would you like to take some pie home for dessert? I think Betty might have wrapped up a piece, especially for you. Grace departed for the kitchen again, leaving the adults alone for the continuation of their conversation. She's handling this better than you are? She doesn't understand what it means yet, leaving everything familiar, starting over in a place where we don't know anyone. She also doesn't understand what $400,000 a year means for her education, her opportunities, her future. You're focusing on what you'd be losing instead of what you'd be gaining. Luke finished his coffee, noting that it had grown cold while they talked. The diner continued its familiar rhythm around them, but he felt disconnected from its comforting predictability, as if Barnes's offer had created a barrier between his current life and his future possibilities. I keep thinking there must be a catch. People don't just offer this kind of opportunity to mechanics from small towns. Maybe they do, when those mechanics save their children's lives and demonstrate exactly the kind of problem-solving abilities they need. Grace returned with a carefully wrapped slice of apple pie, her face glowing with pride at the special treatment. She settled back into the booth, apparently content to listen to the adult conversation that was shaping her future. Daddy, when would we have to decide? Mr. Barnes said there's no deadline. We can take whatever time we need. But you want to decide soon. Luke was continually amazed by his daughter's perceptiveness, her ability to read emotional undercurrents that he thought he'd been concealing. The longer we wait, the harder it becomes to make any decision. Grace nodded, as if this made perfect sense to her. Like when you're standing at the edge of the swimming pool, and you know the water's going to be cold, but you also know you want to swim. Exactly like that. Rose laughed at the analogy, recognizing truth delivered with the clarity that only children could manage. Grace Harper, you're going to do just fine wherever life takes you. I hope so, but I think I'd like to meet Joey first. The little boy Daddy saved. Maybe that would help us understand what this is really about. Luke felt a surge of pride at his daughter's wisdom, her instinct that meeting the Barnes family would provide information that job descriptions and salary figures couldn't convey. That's a very smart idea, sweetheart. Plus, I want to make sure he's okay. Mrs. Foster said car accidents can be really scary for little kids. The evening settled. Around them, with the comfortable weight of routine temporarily restored. Grace finished her homework while Luke nursed another cup of coffee, both of them participating in the familiar rituals that had structured their lives for years. But underneath the normalcy, Luke felt the persistent presence of Edward Barnes's business card, the weight of possibilities that could transform everything if he found the courage to reach for them. Saturday's visit with Joey Barnes would either clarify his decision or make it even more complicated. Either way, Luke knew that his life had already changed in ways that couldn't be undone. The question now was whether he would have the wisdom to recognize the right path forward and the strength to take it. Saturday morning arrived with the kind of crisp October sunlight that made Riverbend look like a postcard version of small-town America. Luke had spent the previous 2 days alternating between excited anticipation and paralyzing anxiety about Joey Barnes's visit, cleaning the apartment with obsessive attention to details that probably wouldn't matter to a 5-year-old, but somehow felt crucial to making the right impression. Grace had thrown herself into preparations with the enthusiasm she brought to any opportunity to meet someone new. She'd helped Luke arrange the living room furniture to create more space, picked wildflowers from the vacant lot behind their building, and practiced what she wanted to say to the little boy her father had saved. "Do you think Joey likes to color? I could share my crayons?" Luke smiled at his daughter's generosity, her instinct to offer friendship through the universal language of childhood activities. "I think most 5-year-olds like to color. What about books? I could read him a story if he wants." "That's a nice idea, sweetheart." Grace had selected 3 of her favorite picture books, arranging them on the coffee table that Luke had rescued from a yard sale and refinished during one of his rare evenings off. The books looked small and worn compared to what the Barnes family could probably afford, but they carried the weight of countless bedtime stories and lazy Saturday mornings. At precisely 2 o'clock, the same black sedan that had delivered Edward Barnes to Harper's Auto Repair pulled up outside their apartment building. Luke watched from the window as Barnes stepped out, then opened the rear door to help a small boy emerge from the back seat. Joey Barnes looked exactly as Luke remembered from the accident scene, but healthier now, his face bright with curiosity rather than shock. Luke met them at the building's front door, noting that Barnes had dressed casually for the visit. Khakis and a polo shirt that probably cost more than Luke's monthly grocery budget, but suggested an effort to appear approachable rather than intimidating. "Mr. Harper, thank you for agreeing to this visit. Luke, please, and thank you for bringing Joey by." Luke knelt to Joey's eye level, remembering how important it was to meet children at their own height rather than looming over them like an adult giant. "Hi, Joey. I'm glad you're feeling better." Joey studied Luke's face with the serious attention that children brought to important moments, clearly comparing this calm apartment building encounter with his last memory of being carried through the rain toward an ambulance. "You're the man who got me out of the car. That's right. How are you doing? Any soreness from the accident? My daddy says I was very brave, but I don't remember being brave. I remember being scared." "Being scared and being brave aren't opposites, Joey. Sometimes being brave means doing what you need to do even when you're scared." Joey nodded solemnly, accepting this wisdom with the gravity that 5-year-olds brought to adult explanations of complex concepts. "Daddy said you have a little girl." "I do. Her name is Grace, and she's very excited to meet you. Would you like to come upstairs?" The climb to the second-floor apartment felt longer than usual, Luke hyper-aware of how the building's worn carpeting and scuffed walls might appear to visitors accustomed to luxury accommodations. But Joey seemed unimpressed by the building's modest condition, chattering happily about the interesting shadows created by the stairwell windows. Grace was waiting in the apartment doorway, her best dress carefully pressed and her hair brushed until it gleamed. She'd been practicing her greeting for the past hour, but when the moment arrived, she simply smiled and extended her hand like a miniature adult. "Hi, Joey. I'm Grace. I'm really glad you're okay." Joey shook her hand with surprising formality, then relaxed into the easy grin that suggested he'd found someone worth befriending. "Hi, Grace. My daddy says your daddy is a hero." "My daddy's. I'm pretty great. Do you want to see my books? I picked out some good ones." Grace led Joey toward the coffee table where her literary selections waited, launching into detailed descriptions of each story's plot and characters. Luke and Barnes settled onto the small couch, watching their children negotiate the delicate social protocols of new friendship. Grace seems very mature for 8. She's had to be. Single parenting requires a certain level of partnership from the child, whether that's fair or not. I remember that feeling. Michelle and I divorced when Joey was 3. Shared custody means he's learned to adapt to different households, different rules, different expectations. Luke had assumed that the Barnes family represented perfect domestic stability, wealth insulating them from the complications that shaped most people's lives. Learning that Barnes had navigated divorce and custody arrangements made him seem more human, more relatable. That must be difficult. Different kind of difficult than what you've experienced. Money can solve some problems, but it can't fix broken relationships or guarantee happiness. Joey had discovered Grace's crayon collection, his excitement evident, as he examined colors that probably seemed ordinary to most children, but apparently held special appeal for someone whose life was typically structured around adult schedules and expensive activities. Grace, can we color together? Of course. What do you want to draw? A car, but not a broken car. A really good car that keeps families safe. Grace accepted this artistic challenge with enthusiasm, spreading paper across the coffee table and beginning the collaborative process of creating Joey's vision. Luke and Barnes watched their children work, the comfortable silence of parents who understood that the most important conversations often happened without words. Joey talks about the accident sometimes, Barnes said quietly. Not the scary parts, but how someone came to help him when he needed it most. He started asking me about people who help others, firefighters and doctors and teachers. Children that age are trying to understand how the world works. The idea that strangers will help them when they're in trouble is pretty important for developing trust. Have you thought more about our conversation? Luke had expected the question but still felt unprepared to answer it. 3 days of consideration had clarified some aspects of the decision while making others more complicated. Every hour since you left my garage. And I keep coming back to the same questions. What if I'm not qualified for the level of responsibility you're describing? What if I take this position and fail spectacularly? What if moving Grace away from everything familiar turns out to be a mistake we can't undo? Barnes nodded, as if these concerns were expected and reasonable. Those are the right questions to ask. Anyone who wasn't worried about those things probably wouldn't be the right person for the job. But they're not easy questions to answer. Let me ask you a different question. What if you don't take this position? What if you stay in River Bend? Continue running Harper's Auto Repair, continue living paycheck to paycheck while your daughter grows up wearing second-hand clothes and dreaming about opportunities she might never have. The question stung because it forced Luke to confront the limitations of the life he'd built, the way that his careful management of their circumstances might actually be constraining Grace's future rather than protecting it. She's happy here. I'm sure she is. Children are remarkably adaptable, and happiness can be found in many different circumstances, but happiness and opportunity aren't the same thing. Grace and Joey had moved from coloring to storytelling. Grace, reading aloud from one of her picture books, while Joey listened with rapt attention. Their easy camaraderie suggested that friendship could develop quickly when children felt safe and welcomed. "Look, Daddy," Joey called out, holding up their collaborative artwork. Grace helped me draw the car that keeps families safe. The drawing showed a vehicle that was equal parts imagination and engineering ambition, equipped with what appeared to be protective shields and emergency communication systems. Luke recognized his daughter's artistic influence in the careful attention to safety details that most children wouldn't consider important. "That's wonderful, Joey. Tell me about how it works." Joey launched into an enthusiastic explanation of their vehicular invention, describing safety features with the kind of creative logic that children brought to problem solving. Grace added technical commentary based on conversations she'd overheard in her father's garage, demonstrating knowledge of automotive systems that impressed Barnes. Grace knows a lot about cars for someone her age. She's been hanging around garages since she could walk, absorbs information like a sponge. Has she expressed any interest in engineering or mechanical work? Luke considered the question, realizing that he'd never directly asked Grace about her career interests, assuming that such conversations belonged to a more distant future. "Grace, what do you want to be when you grow up?" Grace looked up from the coloring project, considering the question with typical seriousness. "I want to help people like Daddy does. Maybe fix cars, or maybe something different. I like figuring out how things work." "What kind of things?" "Everything. Why the coffee maker makes that gurgling sound, how Mrs. Foster's television gets pictures from far away, why some cars break down more than others." Barnes smiled at Grace's curiosity, recognizing the kind of analytical thinking that engineering education was designed to cultivate and enhance. "Those are excellent questions, Grace, the kind that scientists and engineers spend their careers trying to answer. Could I be an engineer? Absolutely, especially if you start learning about mathematics and science early, and if you have opportunities to see how engineering principles work in real applications." Luke felt a flutter of recognition at Barnes's subtle suggestion that educational opportunities might be relevant to Grace's future. The conversation was moving beyond job offers and salary negotiations toward questions about his daughter's potential and how different environments might nurture or limit her development. "Mr. Barnes, can I ask you something?" Grace said, setting down her crayon with deliberate care. "Of course. If my daddy comes to work for you, would I be able to visit his office? I'd like to see what automotive engineering looks like." Barnes exchanged glances with Luke, recognizing that Grace had connected her father's opportunity with her own interests in ways that adult conversations had only implied. "I think that could be arranged. In fact, Barnes Industries has a program that brings children to our facilities for educational tours. You'd be very welcome. And would there be good schools near Daddy's new job? Some of the best schools in Pennsylvania, schools with science programs and engineering clubs and teachers who specialize in helping students explore technical subjects." Grace nodded thoughtfully, clearly filing this information away for future consideration. Luke realized that his daughter was conducting her own evaluation of the Barnes Industries opportunity, asking questions that cut straight to issues he'd been struggling to articulate. "Joey, do you like your school?" "It's okay. We have a really good science teacher, and there's a computer lab with programs that let you design things. Want to see?" Joey pulled out a tablet that his father had apparently brought for entertainment purposes, showing Grace educational software that allowed users to create simple mechanical designs and test their functionality. Grace watched with fascination as Joey demonstrated features that were clearly beyond anything available at Riverbend Elementary. "This is incredible," Grace whispered, her voice carrying the kind of awe that children reserved for truly amazing discoveries. Luke watched his daughter's reaction, understanding that she was seeing possibilities that her current educational environment couldn't provide. Riverbend Elementary was a good school by small-town standards, but it lacked the resources and specialized programs that could nurture specific talents and interests. Grace seems to have a natural aptitude for technical thinking, Barnes observed quietly. She's always been curious about how things work. Curiosity is the foundation of innovation, but curiosity needs the right environment to develop into expertise. The afternoon continued with easy conversation and collaborative play, Joey and Grace building an increasingly elaborate fictional world around their safety car design. Luke found himself relaxing into the visit's comfortable rhythm, noting how naturally the children had bonded despite their different backgrounds. As departure time approached, Joey grew reluctant to leave, asking if he could come back to visit. Grace, again soon. The request touched something in Luke's chest, recognition that his daughter had made a real friend, someone who appreciated her interests and encouraged her curiosity. "Joey, we should let Mr. Harper and Grace have their Saturday evening," Barnes said gently, "but I want to show Grace my Legos next time. I have sets that build machines and robots and all kinds of engineering things. Maybe next time Grace can visit our house," Barnes suggested, looking at Luke for approval. "I'd like that," Grace said quickly. "If Daddy says it's okay." Luke nodded, understanding that the relationship between their families was developing beyond professional courtesy into something more personal and potentially lasting. As they prepared to leave, Barnes pulled Luke aside for a private moment, while the children exchanged promises to continue their friendship regardless of what adult decisions might follow. "Luke, I want you to know that this visit wasn't intended to pressure you about the job offer. But I hope you've seen that this opportunity isn't just about changing your career. It's about expanding possibilities for Grace as well. I understand. Take whatever time you need to decide. But remember that some opportunities don't wait indefinitely for us to feel ready. Sometimes we have to be willing to jump and trust that we'll figure out how to fly on the way down." After the Barnes family departed, Luke and Grace sat together on their small couch, processing the afternoon's events in the comfortable silence that had become their post-visitor routine. "I liked Joey," Grace said eventually. "I could tell. You were very kind to him. He's smart and he asks good questions, and he wasn't weird about our apartment being small." Luke felt a surge of pride at his daughter's observation, her recognition. That character mattered more than circumstances. "What did you think about what Mr. Barnes said about schools and science programs?" Grace was quiet for a long moment, her expression thoughtful in the way that suggested she was assembling complex ideas into coherent conclusions. "I think maybe there are things I could learn in Philadelphia that I can't learn here, but I also think there are things I'd miss about River Bend that I couldn't find anywhere else." "What kinds of things?" "Rose teaching me to cook, Mrs. Foster's. Stories about when she was young, the way everybody knows everybody and looks out for each other." Luke nodded, recognizing that Grace had identified the exact trade-off that made his decision so difficult. "So what do you think we should do?" Grace snuggled closer to her father, her small body warm against his side, as they contemplated a future that seemed full of possibilities and uncertainties in equal measure. "I think we should trust each other, whatever we decide. And I think we should remember that being brave sometimes means trying new things, even when we're scared." Luke kissed the top of his daughter's head, marveling at her wisdom and grateful for the partnership that had sustained them through 8 years of challenges and changes. Outside their small apartment, River Bend settled into evening routines that had remained unchanged for decades. But inside, father and daughter sat together contemplating a decision that would determine whether they remained part of that unchanging rhythm or stepped into a future that promised transformation they could barely imagine. Sunday evening found Luke sitting at his kitchen table, surrounded by papers he'd printed from the library's computers earlier that day. Research about Barnes Industries, articles about automotive safety innovation, information about school districts in the Philadelphia suburbs. The dining table had become mission control for the most important decision of his life. Grace was curled up on the couch with one of her library books, occasionally glancing toward her father's research station with the patient attention of someone who understood that important decisions required serious preparation. She'd spent the afternoon drawing pictures of potential futures, their current apartment in River Bend, imaginary houses in Philadelphia, elaborate diagrams of engineering projects she might pursue. "Daddy, are you finding good answers?" Luke. looked up from a technical article about crash test methodology that he'd been reading for the third time without really absorbing the information. I'm finding more questions, mostly. Sometimes questions are more important than answers. Luke smiled at his daughter's observation, recognizing wisdom that he'd somehow forgotten in his anxiety about making the perfect choice. Grace had approached the Barnes Industries opportunity with the kind of open curiosity that adults often lost in their pursuit of certainty and security. What kinds of questions do you think are most important? Grace marked her place in her book and joined Luke at the table, studying the scattered papers with serious attention. She picked up a photograph of Barnes Industries' main research facility, a gleaming complex that looked more like a university campus than a traditional factory. I think the most important question is whether we'd be helping people. How do you mean? You saved Joey because you knew how to fix things and you weren't afraid to try. If you worked for Mr. Barnes, you'd be teaching other people how to save other kids like Joey. That seems like it would help lots of people. Luke felt something shift in his chest, recognition that his 8-year-old daughter had identified the moral dimension of the decision with clarity that had eluded his own analysis. The Barnes Industries position wasn't just about money or career advancement. It was about using his abilities to create systems that could protect families he'd never meet. That's a very good point, sweetheart. Plus, if we moved to Philadelphia, I could learn things that would help me help people too. Maybe I could become an engineer like you were supposed to be. Luke paused, struck by Grace's casual reference to his abandoned college career. He'd never discussed his educational history in terms of missed opportunities or deferred dreams, but clearly Grace had understood more about his sacrifices than he'd realized. I never told you I was supposed to be an engineer. Mrs. Foster mentioned it once. She said you were really smart in school and that you gave up college to take care of me when I was little. Luke felt a familiar tightness in his throat. The complex emotions that accompanied any discussion of the choices he'd made 8 years ago. Leaving college to become a full-time father had felt like the only possible decision at the time, but he'd sometimes wondered what life might have looked like if different choices had been available. I don't regret that decision, Grace. You're more important than any degree. I know that, but maybe now we could both get what we need. You could finish being an engineer, and I could start learning how to become one. The simplicity of Grace's logic was both appealing and terrifying. She'd reduced the complex decision to its essential elements. An opportunity for Luke to resume his interrupted career path while providing Grace with educational advantages that River Bend couldn't offer. Luke's phone rang, interrupting their conversation. Carl Jackson's name appeared on the screen, probably calling to check on the afternoon's visit with the Barnes family. Hey, Carl, how did it go with the Barnes kid? Really well. Grace and Joey got along great, and Edward Barnes couldn't have been more gracious about visiting our apartment. And Luke could hear the expectation in his friend's voice, the assumption that the afternoon's events had somehow clarified the decision that had been weighing on him for days, and I'm still trying to figure out what to do. Luke, can I say something as your oldest friend? Of course, you're overthinking this. Barnes Industries offered you a job that pays more money than either of us ever imagined making, doing work that could save lives, in a position that recognizes abilities you've been wasting in that garage for years. Luke walked to the apartments, single window, looking out at River Bend's quiet Sunday evening streets. Children played on sidewalks while their parents watched from front porches, the kind of community scene that Norman Rockwell might have painted if he'd focused on modest neighborhoods rather than idealized small towns. It's not that simple. Why not? What's complicated about accepting an incredible opportunity that could transform Grace's future? Everything we know is here. Everyone who cares about us lives within 5 blocks of this apartment. Grace has stability, community, relationships that have sustained her since she was born. Grace also has holes in her shoes and wears hand-me-down clothes from the church donation box. The observation stung because it echoed Rose's comments from earlier in the week, forcing Luke to confront the material limitations that defined his daughter's daily experience. Money isn't everything. No, but it's something. And when you don't have enough of it, that something affects every aspect of your child's life. Grace had been listening to Luke's side of the conversation with the interested attention that children brought to adult discussions about their futures. When he ended the call, she approached with the deliberate manner that suggested she had something important to contribute. Uncle Carl thinks we should take the job. Uncle Carl thinks I'm being too cautious. Are you? Luke considered his daughter's question, trying to separate legitimate concerns from the fear of change that had kept him in River Bend for 8 years, despite several opportunities to pursue better positions elsewhere. I don't know, maybe. Daddy, can I tell you something? Always. Grace climbed onto Luke's lap, settling into the familiar position they'd shared for countless bedtime conversations and important discussions. Her weight felt reassuring, a reminder of the relationship that had anchored his life since she was born. I've been thinking about what being brave really means. And what do you think it means? I think it means doing the right thing even when you're scared. Like when you saved Joey, you were probably scared, but you did it anyway because it was the right thing to do. Luke nodded, understanding that Grace was building toward a conclusion that would probably challenge his cautious approach to the Barnes Industries decision. So maybe accepting Mr. Barnes's job would be like that. Maybe it's the right thing to do, even though it's scary. What makes you think it's the right thing? Grace was quiet for a moment, assembling her thoughts with the careful attention she brought to her most serious observations. Because you'd be using your talents to help people instead of hiding them in a garage where only a few people can benefit. And because I'd get to learn things that could help me use my talents to help people too. Luke felt tears threatening, recognition that his daughter had articulated the moral imperative that he'd been struggling to acknowledge. The Barnes Industries position represented more than financial security. It was an opportunity to apply his abilities on a scale that matched their potential impact. You're very wise for 8 years old. I learned it from you. You always say that we should use our abilities to help other people. I do say that. So maybe it's time to practice what you preach. Luke laughed despite his emotional state, amazed by his daughter's ability to turn his own parenting philosophy into an argument for accepting the Barnes Industries position. When did you get so smart? I've always been smart. I just haven't always had important things to be smart about. They sat together in comfortable silence, watching evening settle over River Bend, while contemplating a future that seemed increasingly clear, despite its obvious complications and uncertainties. Grace, if we decided to accept Mr. Barnes's offer, what would you miss most about River Bend? Grace considered the question seriously, her expression cycling through memories and relationships that had shaped her first 8 years of life. I'd Miss Rose teaching me to cook, and Mrs. Foster's stories about the old days, and knowing everyone in town and having them know me. I'd miss feeling like I belonged somewhere. Those are important things to miss, but I think maybe I could learn to belong somewhere new, and maybe the things I'd learn in Philadelphia would help me create belonging for other people who felt lost or scared. Luke marveled at his daughter's emotional sophistication, her ability to see beyond immediate losses toward longer-term possibilities for growth and contribution. What would you be most excited about? Learning about engineering and science from teachers who really understand those subjects. Maybe making friends with other kids who like to figure out how things work, seeing what Daddy could accomplish when he has the right tools and resources. You think I could accomplish important things? I know you could. You already do accomplish important things, but you do them for one person at a time. Mr. Barnes is offering you a chance to accomplish important things for thousands of people at a time. Luke felt the last of his resistance crumbling under the weight of Grace's logic and his own growing certainty that the Barnes Industries position represented the kind of opportunity that rarely appeared in anyone's life. So what do you think we should do? Grace slipped off his lap and walked to the kitchen table, retrieving Edward Barnes's business card from the stack of research materials. She handed it to Luke with the ceremonial gravity of someone presenting a crucial piece of evidence. I think we should call Mr. Barnes and tell him we're ready to be brave. Luke stared at the business card, feeling its weight and significance in ways that had nothing to do with the expensive paper on which it was printed. The decision that had seemed impossibly complex suddenly felt clear, not because the complications had disappeared, but because the right choice had finally emerged from the confusion. Are you sure, sweetheart? I'm sure. Are you? Luke considered the question, testing his emotional response to the idea of accepting Barnes's offer. Fear was still present, but it was now balanced by excitement, anticipation, and recognition. That some opportunities demanded courage rather than certainty. I think I am. Then let's do it. Luke reached for his phone, then paused as the magnitude of the moment settled around them. In the next few minutes, he would make a phone call that would transform their lives in ways they could anticipate and others they couldn't imagine. Grace, are you ready for everything to change? Daddy, everything already changed the day you saved Joey. We're just finally ready to admit it. Luke dialed Edward Barnes's direct number, the digits familiar now from the business card he'd studied countless times over the past week. The phone rang twice before Barnes answered with the kind of immediate attention that suggested he'd been expecting the call. Mr. Barnes, this is Luke Harper. Luke, I was hoping to hear from you. I've made my decision. Grace and I would like to accept your offer. That's wonderful news. When can you start? Luke looked around the small apartment that had been their home for 3 years, then at Grace, who was watching him with the confident smile of someone who believed in their shared future. How soon do you need me? How does Monday sound? Luke felt his heart rate increase, understanding that the theoretical possibility of change was about to become practical reality, with a timeline that left no room for second thoughts or gradual transitions. This Monday? If that works for you. I know it's fast, but we have projects that could benefit from your input immediately. Barnes Industries will handle all relocation logistics, temporary housing, school enrollment for Grace. You just need to show up, ready to work. Luke met Grace's eyes, seeing excitement rather than anxiety in her expression. She nodded encouragingly, apparently as ready as he was to dive into their new life without looking back. Monday works for us. Excellent. I'll have Helen Martinez email you details about reporting time and location. Luke, I want you to know that Joey hasn't stopped talking about Grace since yesterday's visit. I think our families are going to be good for each other. I think so too. Welcome to Barnes Industries, Luke. I have a feeling this is going to be the beginning of something extraordinary. After ending the call, Luke and Grace sat together in their living room, surrounded by the familiar objects and comfortable routines that had defined their lives, but would soon become memories of the chapter they were closing. Well, Luke said, eventually, I guess we're moving to Philadelphia. I guess we are, Grace replied, her voice carrying the kind of satisfied certainty that comes from making difficult decisions with confidence and unity. Outside their apartment, River Bend continued its quiet Sunday evening rhythm, unaware that 2 of its residents had just committed to a future that would take them far from small-town familiarity toward possibilities they were only beginning to understand. Monday morning, arrived with unseasonable warmth, as if Pennsylvania weather was offering a gentle farewell to Luke and Grace's River Bend chapter. Luke stood in his empty garage at Harper's Auto Repair, the space echoing with memories of 8 years spent coaxing life from dying engines and building relationships one repair at a time. Carl Jackson leaned against the doorframe, watching his friend conduct a final inventory of tools that would be shipped to Philadelphia later in the week. The emotional weight of their goodbye hung between them, complicated by excitement about Luke's future and sadness about the friendship that would now require effort to maintain. "You sure you got everything?" Luke surveyed the workbench where he'd organized his most essential tools, the instruments that had defined his professional identity since returning to River Bend. Each wrench and socket carried memories of specific repairs, challenging problems solved through patience and ingenuity. Everything that matters. Barnes Industries will provide the specialized equipment I'll need, but these tools feel like part of who I am. They should. You've used them to help half the people in this town. Luke nodded, acknowledging the truth of Carl's observation. Harper's Auto Repair had been more than a business. It had been a community service, providing affordable transportation solutions for people who couldn't afford the luxury of choosing. Convenience over necessity. Mrs. Porter stopped by yesterday to say goodbye, brought me a casserole and enough cookies to feed Philadelphia. She's worried about finding another mechanic who'll charge her $50 for a $100 repair. Pete. Walker said he'd honor my pricing for my regular customers, at least for a while. Carl's expression suggested skepticism about Pete Walker's long-term commitment to charity pricing, but he kept his doubts to himself. Some transitions required optimism rather than realism. Luke's phone buzzed with a text from Helen Martinez. "Car arriving at 9 a.m. for transport to Philadelphia. Are you ready?" Luke typed back his confirmation, then showed the message to Carl. 45 minutes until his old life officially ended and his new one began. "Grace, ready for this?" She's been packed since Sunday night. Rose is driving her to school this morning so she can say goodbye to her classmates. Then she'll meet me at Barnes Industries this afternoon. "And you're ready?" Luke considered the call. Questioned honestly, testing his emotional state for the anxiety that had dominated his thoughts for the past week. Surprisingly, he felt calm, centered in a way that suggested he'd made the right decision for the right reasons. As ready as anyone can be for this kind of change. "Luke, I want you to know something. Watching you take this leap gives me hope. That maybe it's not too late for any of us to chase opportunities that seemed impossible." The comment surprised Luke, who'd always seen Carl as someone comfortable with his chosen path, rather than someone harboring unfulfilled ambitions. "What kind of opportunities?" "Pete Walker offered me a partnership last month, part ownership, expansion into custom restoration work, maybe even racing applications. I turned him down because it seemed too risky. And now I'm thinking that watching my best friend become Director of Automotive Safety Innovation might give me the courage to bet on myself." Luke felt a surge of unexpected pride, recognition that his decision might inspire others to reconsider their own assumptions about what was possible. Change had a way of creating ripple effects that extended far beyond the individuals who initiated it. "Carl, you should absolutely consider that partnership. You're one of the best mechanics I've ever known. We'll see. Right now, let's focus on getting you to your new life." They finished loading Luke's personal tools into boxes that would be shipped to Philadelphia, each item carefully wrapped and labeled with the attention to detail that had characterized Luke's approach to everything from engine repairs to parenting decisions. At exactly 9 o'clock, the same black sedan that had brought Edward Barnes to River Bend pulled up outside Harper's Auto Repair. The driver emerged with professional courtesy, introducing himself as Marcus and explaining that he'd been assigned to handle Luke's transportation to Barnes Industries. Mr. Harper, I understand this is a significant day for you. Please let me know if there's anything I can do to make the journey more comfortable. Luke shook hands with Carl, their goodbye carrying the weight of 18 years of friendship and shared dreams that were finally becoming reality for one of them. Stay in touch and seriously consider that partnership. I will. And Luke, don't let them change who you are. Your character is what got you this opportunity. The sedan's interior was more luxurious than any vehicle Luke had ever ridden in, equipped with Wi-Fi, climate control, and enough legroom for someone much taller than his 5'9" frame. As they pulled away from Harper's Auto Repair, Luke watched Riverbend's familiar landmarks scroll past the tinted windows. Rose's Diner, where Grace had spent countless afternoon hours doing homework and absorbing Rose Bennett's informal life. Lessons, the elementary school where Grace had learned to read and made her first friends. Heritage Park, where they'd spent summer evenings on the swings, dreaming about futures that had seemed impossibly distant. The drive to Philadelphia took slightly over 2 hours, giving Luke time to process the magnitude of his transition while reviewing materials that Helen Martinez had prepared for his first day. The Automotive Safety Innovation Division occupied an entire floor of Barnes Industries' main research facility, with laboratories, testing equipment, and design studios that represented capabilities Luke had only imagined. His new office overlooked a courtyard where employees gathered for lunch and informal meetings, the kind of collaborative environment that encouraged the cross-pollination of ideas between different engineering disciplines. The salary and benefits package exceeded anything Luke had dared to hope for, but more importantly, the work itself aligned with his deepest values about using technical skills to protect and serve others. Barnes Industries' main campus emerged from the Pennsylvania countryside like a vision of industrial possibility, glass and steel structures integrated with landscaping that suggested environmental consciousness as well as aesthetic consideration. Luke counted 12 buildings connected by covered walkways, with parking areas designed to accommodate thousands of employees. Marcus guided Luke through security procedures and orientation protocols with the efficiency of someone who'd shepherded many new executives through their first-day transitions. Luke received identification badges, access cards, and a tablet loaded with company information and his first week's schedule. "Mr. Barnes is waiting for you in conference room A," Marcus explained as they rode an elevator to the executive floor. "He wanted to personally welcome you before introducing you to your new team." Edward Barnes stood when Luke entered the conference room, extending his hand with the same confident warmth he'd shown during their garage meeting. But today, he wore the unmistakable authority of someone completely comfortable in his professional environment. "Luke, welcome to Barnes Industries. How was the drive?" "Comfortable, thanks to Marcus, and intimidating thanks to the realization of what I've committed to." Barnes laughed, apparently finding Luke's honesty refreshing rather than concerning. "Intimidation is natural, but remember, we didn't hire you despite your unconventional background. We hired you because of it. I hope you're right." "I am right. Let me show you something." Barnes led Luke to a wall-mounted display showing automotive safety statistics from the past decade. The numbers were sobering. Hundreds of thousands of injuries and deaths that occurred in vehicles lacking modern safety systems. Most of these casualties involve vehicles that are more than 10 years old, cars and trucks that were built before. Advanced safety systems became standard. Our division's mission is to develop retrofittable technologies that can protect people driving the vehicles they already own. Luke studied the statistics, understanding that his new position carried moral weight that extended far beyond engineering challenges or corporate profits. How many lives are we talking about potentially saving? Conservative estimates suggest that comprehensive retrofittable safety systems could prevent 30,000 deaths and 300,000 serious injuries annually. That's if we can develop technologies that are affordable, reliable, and installable in ordinary garages. The scale of potential impact was staggering, transforming Luke's career transition from personal opportunity into something approaching moral obligation. Where do we start? With your team, 12 engineers with specializations ranging from materials science to crash dynamics. Brilliant people who understand theory but have limited experience with real-world implementation challenges. Barnes opened the conference room door, revealing a group of people who looked exactly like Luke had expected. Young, highly educated, probably straight from prestigious graduate programs. They studied him with curious attention, clearly wondering how a small-town mechanic had earned the authority to lead their department. Everyone, I'd like you to meet Luke Harper, your new Director of Automotive Safety Innovation. Luke stepped forward, acknowledging each team member's introduction, while fighting the urge to explain that he didn't belong among people with advanced degrees from MIT and Stanford. Instead, he focused on the problem-solving challenges that had brought them together. I know my background is different from what you might have expected. I don't have a PhD in engineering or decades of corporate research experience. What I do is 15 years of making old systems work with limited resources, and 8 years of understanding how ordinary people interact with their vehicles. Dr. Amanda Richardson, the team's senior research engineer, raised her hand with academic formality. Mr. Harper, could you elaborate on how your practical experience will inform our research priorities? Luke considered the question, recognizing it as both genuine curiosity and subtle challenge to his qualifications. Most safety innovations are designed for ideal conditions: new vehicles, professional installation, regular maintenance by authorized dealers. But most Americans drive 10-year-old cars that get serviced at independent shops by mechanics who learned their trade the same way I did. And that affects our design approach. How? It means we need to develop systems that can be diagnosed with standard OBD scanners, repaired with tools that every garage already owns, and maintained by people who understand carburetors better than computer networks. Dr. Richardson nodded slowly, apparently recognizing the practical wisdom behind Luke's perspective. Can you give us a specific example? Luke walked to the whiteboard that dominated one conference room wall, sketching a simple diagram of a collision avoidance system that he'd been conceptualizing during the drive from River Bend. Current collision avoidance systems require integration with the vehicle's computer network, which means they can't be retrofitted to cars built before 2010. But what if we developed a standalone system that used mechanical linkages to provide emergency braking assistance? The team gathered around the whiteboard as Luke expanded his diagram, showing how mechanical systems could provide safety benefits without requiring electronic integration. Their questions grew more engaged, less skeptical, as they recognized the innovation potential in his approach. "This is actually fascinating," commented Dr. Kevin Park, a specialist in automotive electronics. "We've been so focused on software solutions that we've ignored purely mechanical alternatives. Mechanical systems have advantages," Luke explained. "They're more reliable, easier to maintain, and they work regardless of the vehicle's electronic sophistication." The morning continued with technical discussions that felt like the most stimulating conversations Luke had experienced since dropping out of college. His new team challenged his ideas while absorbing his perspective on real-world implementation challenges. At noon, Barnes returned to escort Luke to the executive dining room, where they could discuss his first impressions without the formal atmosphere of team meetings. "How are you feeling about your team?" intimidated by their education, but excited by their enthusiasm. They're asking the right questions, and they're recognizing that your answers come from a perspective they couldn't develop in graduate school. Luke's phone buzzed with a text from Grace. Made it to new school. Everyone's really nice, and the science lab is amazing. Can't wait to see your office. Luke showed the message to Barnes, who smiled at Grace's obvious excitement about her new educational environment. She's enrolled at Westfield Academy, one of the best STEM programs in the state. Their middle school engineering curriculum is more advanced than most high school programs. She's going to love it. Grace has always been curious about how things work. Speaking of which, I have something for you. Barnes pulled out a folder containing architectural plans for a house in suburban Philadelphia, complete with photographs of the interior and detailed descriptions of the neighborhood amenities. Barnes Industries maintains several executive residences. For senior staff, this one has been prepared for you and Grace, fully furnished and ready for immediate occupancy. Luke studied the photographs, trying to reconcile the spacious rooms and manicured landscaping with his mental image of appropriate housing for a single father and his 8-year-old daughter. This looks like it's meant for a family with significantly more resources than we're accustomed to. It's meant for a family whose father is Director of Automotive Safety Innovation at Barnes Industries. Luke, you need to start thinking of yourself differently. The position you've accepted carries responsibilities and compensation that reflect its importance. I'm not sure I'm ready for this level of change. Change is never comfortable, but consider this. 6 months from now, Grace will be thriving in an educational environment that challenges her abilities. You'll be leading research that could save thousands of lives. The discomfort of adjustment will seem insignificant compared to the impact you're making. Luke folded the house plans carefully, accepting them as evidence of a future that still felt surreal despite its obvious reality. Edward, can I ask you something personal? Of course. Why are you investing so much in someone you met a week ago during an emergency situation? Barnes was quiet for a moment, apparently considering how much personal history to share. Because 15 years ago, I was a wealthy businessman who drove through his hometown without stopping, focused entirely on getting to my next meeting. If it hadn't been for a domestic violence situation that forced me to pay attention to what was happening in Riverbend, I might never have reconnected with the community that shaped me. The incident Detective Gibson mentioned. Exactly. That experience taught me that sometimes the most important thing you can do is stop what you're doing and help someone who needs it. You did that for Joey. Now, I want to do that for you. Luke felt a profound sense of gratitude, recognition that his rescue of Joey Barnes had created connections that extended far beyond the immediate emergency. Thank you for the opportunity, for believing in me, for understanding that this is about more than just a job. It's about using your abilities at the scale they deserve. And Luke, yes, when Grace visits your office later today, she's going to see her father in an environment that matches his potential. That vision is going to shape her understanding of what's possible for her own future. Luke spent the afternoon meeting department heads, reviewing research protocols, and beginning to understand the scope of resources available for his division's work. By 5 o'clock, when Grace arrived with Rose Bennett for the promised office visit, Luke felt like he was finally beginning to comprehend the magnitude of his new position. Grace's eyes widened as they toured the research facilities, her questions growing more sophisticated as she absorbed information about crash testing, materials analysis, and computer-aided design systems. Daddy, you're going to help design safety systems that protect families like ours. That's exactly what we're going to do, sweetheart. This is the coolest job in the world. Luke laughed, recognizing that his daughter's enthusiasm was helping him see his new position through the lens of possibility rather than intimidation. As they prepared to leave for their new house, Luke realized that the transformation was complete. Luke Harper of Riverbend, Pennsylvania, had become Luke Harper, Director of Automotive Safety Innovation at Barnes Industries. The man who'd struggled to pay rent on a one-bedroom apartment was now responsible for a billion-dollar research division. Change felt impossible and inevitable in equal measure, like stepping through a doorway he hadn't known existed until Joey Barnes created the circumstances that revealed it. 6 months later, Luke stood in the testing facility at Barnes Industries, watching a crash test that would have seemed like science fiction during his Riverbend days. The dummy-filled sedan struck a barrier at 35 miles per hour, while sensors recorded data from the retrofitted safety system his team had developed for vehicles manufactured before 2010. Dr. Amanda Richardson approached with a tablet, displaying preliminary results, her expression carrying the controlled excitement of an engineer who'd just witnessed successful innovation. Luke, the mechanical collision mitigation system performed exactly as designed, reduced impact force by 43%, with deployment time under 2 seconds. Luke studied the data, feeling satisfaction that had nothing to do with proving skeptics wrong and everything to do with knowing that this technology could save lives in the real world. The system used purely mechanical sensors and pneumatic actuators, meaning it could be installed and maintained in any garage with standard equipment. What's the projected manufacturing cost? Under $400 per unit, with installation requiring approximately 2 hours for a qualified mechanic. Luke nodded, understanding that affordability and accessibility were as important as technical performance. The most sophisticated safety system was worthless if ordinary families couldn't afford to install it in their vehicles. Have we tested compatibility with different vehicle types, successfully integrated with sedans, SUVs, and pickup trucks? Manufactured between 2005 and 2015. The mechanical interface adapts to different brake systems without requiring electronic modifications. Luke felt a surge of pride, not just in his team's technical achievement, but in their commitment to developing solutions that addressed real-world constraints rather than ideal laboratory conditions. His phone buzzed with a text from Grace. Science. Fair project won first place. Can't wait to show you tonight. Luke smiled, recognizing that Grace's academic success was perhaps the most satisfying aspect of their Philadelphia transition. Westfield Academy had challenged her curiosity while providing resources that Riverbend Elementary couldn't have. Offered. Good news, Dr. Richardson asked, noting Luke's expression. My daughter won her school science fair. She designed a water filtration system for disaster relief applications, following in her father's footsteps, exceeding them actually. Grace is thinking about problems I never would have considered at her age. The afternoon continued with meetings about production planning, patent applications, and partnership discussions with automotive manufacturers interested in offering retrofittable safety systems to their customers. Luke's division had exceeded all performance targets, earning recognition from industry leaders and praise from safety advocacy organizations. At 4 o'clock, Edward Barnes arrived for their weekly progress review, carrying coffee and the relaxed demeanor of someone who'd just witnessed his investment strategy paying dividends. Luke, I just finished reading the National Highway Safety Administration's preliminary evaluation of your mechanical collision system. They're calling it revolutionary and potentially transformative for automotive safety. The team did exceptional work. The team had exceptional leadership. Your background continues to provide insights that purely academic approaches miss. Luke had grown more comfortable with praise over the past 6 months, learning to accept recognition for achievements that felt like natural extensions of problem-solving skills he'd been developing since high school shop class. Any thoughts? About the next phase, Barnes pulled out a folder containing market research and financial projections that suggested demand for retrofittable safety systems far exceeded initial estimates. 3 major manufacturers want to license your designs. Ford is interested in offering installation through their dealer networks. General Motors wants to explore integration with their certified service centers. And Toyota wants to discuss a strategic partnership that could put your systems in millions of vehicles over the next 5 years. Luke absorbed this information. Slowly, understanding that the decisions he made in the coming months could affect automotive safety on a scale that dwarfed even his most optimistic projections. What kind of strategic partnership? They want to create a subsidiary focused entirely on retrofittable safety technology, with you as Chief Technology Officer and Barnes Industries as primary research partner. Luke paused, recognizing that this opportunity represented another life transformation, perhaps even more significant than his transition from River Bend to Philadelphia. That sounds like it would require relocating again. Actually, Toyota wants to build the new facility here in Pennsylvania. They're impressed by our research capabilities and want to maintain proximity to our laboratories. Luke felt relief, understanding that another major relocation would have been difficult for Grace, who'd finally established friendships and academic momentum at Westfield Academy. What would this mean for my current team? They'd transfer to the new subsidiary with expanded responsibilities and significant salary increases. Dr. Richardson would become your deputy director, managing day-to-day operations while you focus on strategic development. Luke walked to the window overlooking the courtyard where employees gathered for lunch, noting that his perspective on leadership had evolved considerably since his first intimidating day at Barnes Industries. "Edward, can I ask you something?" "Always." "Do you ever regret investing so much in someone whose only qualification was rescuing your son from a car accident?" Barnes laughed, apparently finding the question absurd rather than legitimate. "Luke, in the past 6 months, your division has developed 3 patentable technologies, established partnerships with major manufacturers, and created solutions that could save thousands of lives annually. If that's what happens when I invest in unqualified people, I should probably rethink my entire hiring strategy. I had help, my team, the resources you provided, the freedom to pursue unconventional approaches. You had talent that was being wasted in a small-town garage. All we did was provide an environment where that talent could flourish." Luke's phone rang with a call from Carl Jackson, the first contact from River Bend in several weeks. Luke answered, with genuine pleasure, eager to hear news from the community that had shaped his life for 8 years. "Carl, how's the partnership with Pete Walker working out?" "Better than I could have imagined. We're booked solid through next month, and we just landed a contract to restore vintage racing cars for a collector in Pittsburgh. That's fantastic." "Luke, I have to tell you something. Taking that partnership was the smartest decision I've made in years. Watching you leap into your new life gave me permission to take risks I'd been avoiding for decades." Luke felt warmth spread through his chest, recognition that his career transformation had inspired others to pursue their own opportunities for growth and advancement. Any regrets about leaving River Bend? None. Well, almost none. Grace misses. "Rose is cooking and I miss the simplicity of knowing everyone in town, but we've built something good here. Rose misses you both." She framed the newspaper article about your promotion and hangs it behind the register like you're some kind of local celebrity. Luke smiled, touched by Rose Bennett's pride in his success, but also feeling the familiar pang of homesickness for relationships that had sustained him through difficult years. How's Mrs. Foster? Still telling anyone who'll listen that she knew you were destined for great things. She's become something of a town historian, documenting stories about River Bend residents who've gone on to achieve success elsewhere. Mrs. Porter, still driving the Buick you fixed last year, says it runs better now than when she bought it new. The conversation continued for another 10 minutes, covering updates about mutual friends and changes in Riverbend's economic landscape. When it ended, Luke felt reconnected to his roots without longing to return to the limitations that had defined his previous life. "Missing home?" Barnes asked, having overheard enough of the conversation to understand its emotional content. "Missing people, but not circumstances. Riverbend will always be important to me, but I couldn't have become who I am now if I'd stayed there." Growth requires leaving comfortable situations behind. Speaking of growth, what's Grace's opinion about the Toyota partnership? Barnes smiled, apparently anticipating the question. "Why don't you ask her yourself? She's waiting in your office with Joey." Luke hurried to his office, finding Grace and Joey hunched over a computer displaying her award-winning science fair project. Joey had grown considerably in 6 months, his confidence and curiosity blossoming under the influence of friendship with someone who shared his interest in engineering and problem-solving. "Daddy, look what Joey and I designed." Grace turned the computer screen toward Luke, revealing detailed drawings of a portable water purification system that incorporated advanced filtration techniques with simple mechanical components. "This is incredible, sweetheart. Tell me how it works." Grace launched into a technical explanation that would have impressed graduate students, describing flow rates and filtration efficiency with the casual expertise of someone who'd absorbed complex concepts through enthusiastic study. "The best part is that it can be built using materials available in most hardware stores," Joey added. Grace figured out how to make advanced technology accessible to people who don't have fancy equipment. Luke felt a surge of recognition, understanding that his daughter had internalized the same philosophical approach that had made his automotive safety work successful. Sophisticated solutions designed for real-world implementation constraints. "Have you considered entering this design in national competitions?" "Mrs. Peterson thinks we should submit it to the junior division of the National Science Foundation Awards," Grace said, referring to her advanced science teacher at Westfield Academy. "That's an excellent idea." Joey's father appeared in the office doorway, having finished his own business meetings and come to collect his son. Edward Barnes surveyed the scene with obvious satisfaction, recognizing that the friendship between their children had developed into the kind of intellectual partnership that would benefit both families for years to come. "How did the crash test go?" Barnes asked. 43% impact reduction, successful integration across multiple vehicle types, manufacturing cost under $400. "Luke, those results exceed our most optimistic projections." Grace looked up from her computer with the interested attention of someone who understood that adult conversations about technical achievements were relevant to her own aspirations. "Daddy, does this mean your safety system will be available for families like ours used to be?" Luke felt his throat tighten with emotion. Recognition that his daughter had identified the moral dimension that made his work meaningful beyond professional success or financial rewards. "That's exactly what it means, sweetheart. Families who drive older cars will be able to afford safety technology that used to be available only in expensive new vehicles. So other kids won't have to be scared in car accidents like Joey was. That's our goal." Grace nodded with satisfaction, apparently pleased that her father's work aligned with her understanding of how abilities should be used to help others. "Daddy, I want to show you something else." Grace pulled out a letter from Westfield Academy's admissions office offering her placement in their accelerated mathematics and science program for gifted students. "This would mean taking high school level courses while I'm still in middle school." Luke read the letter carefully, noting that the program would provide Grace with educational opportunities that surpassed anything available in Riverbend's entire school system. What do you think about it? I think I'm ready for bigger challenges, and I think maybe someday I could work on problems like you work on, but for different applications. What kind of applications? Maybe environmental engineering or medical device design or space exploration systems. Luke marveled at his daughter's expanding vision of possibility, understanding that her dreams now encompassed opportunities that had been literally unimaginable during their Riverbend years. Those are all excellent fields for someone with your interests and abilities. Plus, if I'm going to design things that help people, I should probably understand as much science and mathematics as possible. Edward Barnes had been listening to this conversation with growing admiration for Grace's intellectual maturity and career planning abilities. Grace, Barnes Industries has internship programs for high school students interested in engineering careers. If you continue on your current academic trajectory, I'd be delighted to offer you a position when you're ready. Grace's face lit up with excitement, recognizing that she was being offered a pathway from her current education toward meaningful professional opportunities. Really? I could work on actual engineering projects. Absolutely. Learning how theoretical knowledge applies to practical problem solving is essential for developing engineering expertise. Luke felt overwhelmed by gratitude, understanding that Edward Barnes's investment in their family extended far beyond his own career opportunity to encompass Grace's entire future trajectory. Edward, I don't know how to thank you for everything you've done for us. You don't need to thank me, Luke. You've earned everything you've achieved through your abilities and character. I simply provided a platform that matched your potential. Still, 6 months ago, we were worried about paying the electric bill. Today, Grace is discussing internships at Barnes Industries. And 6 months from now, you'll be Chief Technology Officer of a major automotive safety subsidiary, while Grace continues excelling in advanced academic programs. Change builds momentum. Grace and Joey gathered their project materials, preparing to leave for dinner at the Barnes family home. A weekly tradition that had developed as their friendship deepened and their families grew closer. Daddy, are you happy with how everything turned out? Luke considered his daughter's question seriously, weighing their current circumstances against the life they'd left behind in Riverbend. I'm happier than I ever thought possible, sweetheart. Not just because of money or career success, but because we're both using our abilities in ways that help other people. Me too. And Daddy? Yes? I think maybe sometimes the bravest thing you can do is trust that good things can happen, even when they seem too good to be true. Luke hugged his daughter tightly, recognizing wisdom that had taken him 34 years to learn and she'd mastered at 9. You're absolutely right, Grace. Sometimes the best opportunities come disguised as impossible dreams. Outside Luke's office window, the Pennsylvania sunset painted the Barnes Industries campus in shades of gold and orange, while father and daughter contemplated a future that promised continued growth, meaningful work, and the satisfaction of using their talents to protect and serve others. Luke Harper's transformation from struggling mechanic to automotive safety executive was complete, but his story was just beginning. In the research laboratories and testing facilities around them, solutions were being developed that would save lives, prevent injuries, and make automotive safety accessible to families who'd never been able to afford protection before. The little boy he'd pulled from a burning car had become the gateway to a life beyond anything Luke had imagined possible. And the 8-year-old daughter who'd encouraged him to be brave had grown into a young woman whose own dreams now encompassed changing the world through science and engineering. Sometimes, Luke reflected, the most important moment in your life arrives without warning, demanding split-second decisions that determine everything that follows. 6 months ago, he'd made the choice to save Joey Barnes without thinking about consequences or rewards. Today, he understood that the real rescue had been his own. The end. Up next, 2 more incredible stories are waiting for you right on your screen. If you enjoyed this one, you won't want to miss this. Just click to watch. And don't forget to subscribe. It would mean a lot.